Good morning. Welcome to JLCAR. Looks like we got enough room here. Is that better? Yes, okay, you can hear me. All right. Let's see who's here. Senator Chanley, Senator Ward, Senator Whitley. Senator Gray is sitting in for Senator Lang, who can't make it. And Representative Doucette, you're sitting in for Senator Ennis. Okay. And I'm here. Okay. And there's Representative Schmidt. Okay, we don't need any House alternates. Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, the minutes of the previous meeting.
Move to accept.
And I'll second.
And a second. Is there any discussion of the minutes of the previous meeting? All right, we have a motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. The consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they want to remove from the consent agenda?
Seeing none, I'll move to approval.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you all. And that is a lot of it. All right, regular agenda.
All right, the first on the regular agenda is...
Actually, I think Representative Land has suggested that we take up the solid waste program rules first, and she has a motion.
Okay,
Thank you. I would move a preliminary objection on the rule FP 2024-74.
Second.
Do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We have received a very, very large amount of testimony raising questions with this rule. There are questions that were raised both about the specifics and how it relates to the safety that's done not just in this country, but around the world. There's a question of how it relates to the existing rules as well. We have also heard questions about the process and which voices have been heard, how it's been recognized, and basically how public input has or has not been listened to. So I believe that there needs to be some more work to make sure that all of the concerned voices are heard and that we understand exactly what this rule change will mean, not just for our landfills, but for the people of New Hampshire. And so more specifically, we can object on the condition of this being contrary to the public interest, about not being responsive to the public need. We have received a decent amount of testimony that suggests that. And I'm not sure if I need to run through all the different issues on the preliminary objection.
You need to explain the
Yes.
reasons for the preliminary objection, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to comment that there was vast amounts of comment, and the explanations on how it was addressed are extremely technical, and it didn't seem to me that many of the commenters who came back and complained about the rule really understood how the comments were actually addressed. There's also the issue that these rules are much more protective than the existing rules, which have been extended for as long as we're in rulemaking and are what is now currently being used to evaluate, I believe it's 2 landfill applications. And if we drag this out any much further, it's possible that the landfills in question might be approved on the 10-year-old rules rather than the new rules, which are more protective. And I don't believe that's what anybody wants. So I'm going to support the objection and hope the agency can come back with some more accessible information. Senator Gregg?
My only question is to the staff is if there is anything else we need to waive, any of the deadlines or anything to accomplish this.
No, the preliminary objection creates a 45-day period for the agency to respond. And after that, JLCAR has a 50-day period to respond to that.
Yes, but
It extends the rules.
but after some discussions with other people, I think it's likely that they would be able to come back with some answers for our December meeting, and we could give it a fair shot, and that will also give us a chance to read a bit more of the testimony. Any other comments?
Just to
Representative
be
Schmidt?
clear on the objection, so you are objecting according to public interest under JLCAR 40301A2 and 40301G?
Yeah.
And are you also objecting under the legislative intent issue surrounding the purpose statement?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to concur with Representative Leon's remarks and the chairs as well.
Madam Chair.
Okay, anyone else? Representative Whitley? Oh, Senator Whitley, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if the committee wanted to hear from members of the public who were here. I know this is an issue that people care deeply about, and I wonder if we wanted to hear from everyone.
The members of the public have submitted large quantities of written testimony that I don't believe much of the committee has actually had a chance to digest yet. And we will, if necessary, we'll talk to other people on the at the meeting when the agency has their response. We have heard enough of the public testimony to be concerned about the rules, and that's why we're objecting.
Madam Chair, has there written testimony been submitted by any of the parties that are coming here today?
Yes, you have have some right there in front of you.
Yes, so over 500 pages of testimony were submitted to our office. I have reviewed those. I have some here in my stack that I just received today before the meeting, which have not been reviewed, but they will be added to the file and added to your meeting packets online.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments? In that case, the motion is to preliminarily object to the landfill rules, the 800 rules, and those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to getting a response from the agency. Okay. All right. Back to education. Before we hear from the staff on this, I want to make it perfectly clear that this is not a public hearing. We have received, again, vast quantities of public testimony, which has been considered by both the committee and the Board of Education. And I also noticed that on the more recent submissions, they were, first of all, based significantly on old versions of the rules, and they didn't reflect the changes that had been made in response to the first round of comments. So I'm going to say that we don't need to hear duplicative testimony. We had over an hour of it a month ago, and I am not the least bit interested in hearing the same things over and over again, except as the Board of Education states how they changed the rule in response to said comments. And so, yes, Senator Gray?
I also want to make sure that the public knows that if their objection is to the RSA and the rules accurately reflect what is in the RSA, that is not something that this committee can do anything about.
Thank you. Yes, I was getting on to the next point, which is we are not a policy committee. We can only observe the policy as set in the statute and see how the rules follow the statute. If the rules violate the statute, that's something we will talk about. If they support the statute, but the public has concerns with parts or all of the statute, that's not something we can do anything with. So all right, any other, Representative Rhoda?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to say that if the rules violate the statute or indicate the lack of legislative intent, those are things that we would want to hear about.
Right, but if they're following the statute, that's all we can enforce. We can't object to a rule because we don't like the policy that the legislature has adopted.
Agree.
Much as we would like to sometimes, but we can't.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Yeah, it's more than just the statute. We can object to if the rules are contrary to public interest. So I want to be clear about that. It's contrary to legislative intent and contrary to the public interest. So it's a little broader than just the statute.
well, yes, but from some of the comments, I was getting the impression that there is a policy dispute, and that is not something we should be taking up. All right, so
So we are looking at proposal 2024-41. This has been called the first half of the 306s. It includes ED 30601 to ED 30626. This includes the minimum standards for public school approval, and I have no substantive comments on this rule. On October 29th, the Legislative Oversight Committee of Education Improvement and Assessment Program voted 4-2 to recommend support of this proposal with the contingency that the term educator as defined is changed to the definition from RSA 21N 8DC. That definition of educator is educator means teacher or certified paraprofessional. I am looking at an amended conditional approval request from the department that includes that change as recommended by the Oversight Committee. And so I have no further comments on this.
thank you. Does the Board of Education have a comment that we need to hear? No, okay. Thank you. Representatives Myler and Luno have some concerns about the process, and we'll give them a couple of minutes.
Madam Chair, would you like me to go over 42 also,
Um,
so we can take them together?
I believe that this is relative to both of them, so we'll, and they're there, let them finish, and then we'll hear about 42.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Representative Mel Myler, Merrimack County, District 9, representing the towns of Hopkinton and Bow. I come before you today to oppose the process for the development of the 306 education rules that are before you today. I have been involved in New Hampshire education policymaking for over 30 years. I have served as Executive Director of NEA New Hampshire for 21 years and for 12 years on the House Education Committee as the ranking Dem and Chair. I will address 4 concerns. 1, the historic role of the department has played in the education policy and rulemaking. 2, the contracted services of developing the proposed 306 rules. 3, the role of HB 1622, demanding the recognition of citizen input in rulemaking. And 4, HB 1163, the role of the Legislative Oversight Committee. Those are the 4 areas I want to address. First, the Department of Education has historically actively engaged the education community in the development of rules and policy impacting students. They have led the engagement of members of school boards, administrators, and teachers in seeking their input. These are the professionals that work day to day on implementing the standards and the rules governing education of our students. For example, the policies related to teacher evaluation and the educator ethics and code of conduct actively brought together by the department practitioners in the field. This historic role of directly enlisting those in the field did not happen in this current process of the 306 rules. Second, the granting of the $75,000 contract to the National Center for Competency-Based Learning violated the historic engagement of the school community. I have deep respect for the president of the NCCBL for his commitment to New Hampshire education, but the model used was flawed. He gathered a few representatives of the education leadership and created an initial document. He then conducted a series of events across the state trying to share components of the draft document. The intent of the session was to seek community input, but input never was achieved. I attended 3 sessions. There was an overview of the draft document. The document was not shared so that the attendees did not have an opportunity to provide input or reaction. Most of those attending were school personnel. The result was frustration because they lacked the importance of the work being done. An opportunity for vital input was lost. There was an 11th hour attempt to include some school advocates in the review, but it was a little too late and the timing was wrong. Third, the last session of the legislature demonstrated its commitment to citizen input on rulemaking. Both the Senate and the House overrode the governor's veto of HB 1622. In case you forgot what that action was, let me refresh your memory. This is the quote from that law. Quote, item E, a report of public comments received on the rule shall be created. The report shall indicate how the comment was incorporated into the final rule. If the comment was not incorporated into the final rule, the agency shall provide a detailed explanation that includes the facts, data, interpretation, and policy choices that justified why the adopting agency did not amend the rules. Because of the flawed input process, as I noted above, Christine Downey, who is here today to present her concerns about the process, she's an educator out of Goshen. She took it upon herself to initiate an independent 306 review process. You have received a summary of her 2-year work involving over 200 educator practitioners. Her work represents the historic role the department should have played at the outset of the rule of the process. She has made multiple presentations to the State Board of Education. She has been an advocate representing the interests of those who will implement those rules. When the Commissioner of Education was asked at the legislative oversight session what was the status of Dr. Downing's work, his response was, quote, thank you for her work, end quote. When pressed by a member of the committee, he could not cite anywhere in the proposed document where the Downing work was represented or included. Fourth and finally, the Education Legislative Oversight Committee's role has been totally dismissed by the department. Again, there was clear legislative intent on the role of the Oversight Committee in reviewing and recommending rules. In an earlier session, we adopted HB 1163. Let me state what that says. Quote, review and make recommendations relating to academic standards under the consideration of the State Board of Education pursuant to RSA 93E:2-A. And this is the new language, and minimum standards for public school approval under the consideration by the State Board of Education pursuant to 93. The Oversight Committee held 5 sessions. Because of the multiple drafts, it was difficult for them to receive the final version. The committee's legislative assistant produced a side-by-side version. The department presented themselves just one time to the committee. in those 5 sessions. In the middle of that session, the department realized that the committee had the wrong version of the document, and further, they did not provide the committee with the department's reference documents that they were working from. There was confusion. Subsequently, the chair of the committee met with the commissioner, seeking answers to the question he had. The committee members had no further opportunity to get answers to the questions they had. The lack of respect by the department for the legislative process is a clear violation of the legislative oversight mandate. For these 4 reasons, I object to the rules. The rules are very important and they need revision. The current rules have established a sound educational system for our students. We have continued to rank within the top 5 nationally because of these rules. These rules have always included active engagement of educational personnel. Finally, how this committee deals with the objections to those that are before you is key to the precedent that you will make in considering the future rules coming before you. Clearly, I believe that the department has violated its historic role, its intent of 1622 and HB 1163. No state department is exempt from the role of the legislature. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to express my views.
Thank you. Representative Lunel, do you have a few
Sure.
additions to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll streamline my comments as Representative Myler has covered quite a bit of it. For the record, my name is Dave Luno, representing the people of Merrimack County District 9, which include the towns of Hopkinton and Bow. But as we all know, we all have statewide responsibilities, so all Granite Staters are in our interest. I want to quickly go through what the Legislative Oversight Committee did. So the committee is actually established in RSA 193C8A, and it does have authority to review and recommend any proposed rules before those rules are approved by the State Board of Education. And as Representative Myler said, that authority was expanded just this summer when the governor signed House Bill 1163 to not only include academic standards, but also the minimum standards for school approval. The committee actually started its work back in March 2023 with respect to the proposed standards and reviewing what the committee's statutory authority is over reviewing and recommending such proposed changes to the rules. It met twice actually in 2023. Where much of the discussion in its second meeting was largely talking about the process it was actually a roadshow, the process for public input, beginning with I think a forum at Campbell High School and going to Concord and going to Bow, where I attended along with Representative Myler and about 20 other people. A year went by after that meeting before the committee next met in the summer of 2024, where members of the Accountability and Legislative Oversight Committee received a 46-page proposal of changes to what's known as the front half of the rules. Over nearly 2 hours, the committee barely got through the first 2 pages of definitions, and general discussion was directed to leaving the rules as is, without any changes at all.
Excuse me, what was the date the preliminary
That
draft was
was
issued?
that was on June 26, 2024.
All right, so you met shortly after the preliminary initial proposal was issued?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make the timelines straight.
Right. So I believe the preliminary proposal, I don't have it in front of me, may have been dated February 2024. So
It was issued to the public in June.
okay, in that, so that
It was
that date-
undoubtedly in work for quite a while.
that date
before
lines
that.
up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Please continue.
So 2 months later, on August 22nd, 2024, the commissioner, along with the Education Department's rule administrator, Julie Shea, testified before the committee. During questioning, it was made clear by Ms. Shea that the committee was provided with the incorrect draft of the proposed rules. And you can actually find that at 25 minutes, 45 seconds into the meeting. During the meeting, the commissioner avoided direct questions of why the proposed rules, specifically 22 and 23, were not considered to be changes to academic standards. The committee met again October 17th, 2024. Commissioner Edelblue and Ms. Shea returned to the committee to present the back half of the proposed rule changes that clearly would impact the academic standards, meaning what students should know at certain grade levels. In fact, the proposed changes scrapped existing rules pertinent to curriculum instruction and assessment in each of the contact areas required under statute RSA 193E2A, and instead replaced those rules with references to curriculum frameworks, some dating back more than 2 decades. The committee was not provided with, nor did it conduct any review of the referenced curriculum frameworks that apparently include academic standards. Shortly thereafter, on October 21st, 2024, the committee reviewed the proposed rules with respect to the 2018 report from the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Costing of Inadequate Education, and I believe Representative Myler served on that committee. In that report, that legislative committee issued a finding that the student-teacher ratio, quote, necessary to provide the opportunity for an adequate education in New Hampshire is 25-1 in K2 and 30-1 in grades 3 through 12. This most recent legislative intent is clearly in conflict to the proposed rules, which eliminate maximum class size standards. Members had many questions specific to the proposed rules, both front and back. However, the department was a no-show at that meeting. On October 29th, 2024, so now we're just a week after that last meeting, the committee held a final meeting to get our questions answered. I spoke with the chair before the meeting, and he told me that he had a private meeting with the commissioner and that his questions had been answered. So I asked the chair, who was going to answer my questions? And his response was that the Department of Education would have someone present at that final meeting that day to answer questions from the committee members. However, nobody from the Education Department showed up. The department was not there to answer questions from the committee members, and I feel that not only failed me, but failed the thousands of constituents who I represent in the legislature, and for that matter, more than 1 million Granite Staters who we all represent. In summary, the Department of Education has not provided members of the Legislative Oversight Committee with the correct, complete, and accurate documents or answers to questions necessary for the committee to do its job per the statute and represent our constituents. And the videos of the meeting serve as evidence of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes,
we have a chair now in the egress area. We have a chair in the egress area. If the lady could move over to the table, if she needs that or something, but we do need to keep that aisle open so that if there is a problem that we can take care of it.
I apologize. I've had recent surgery and that was
And we would like to accommodate you to make sure that if you need your foot up or whatever, that we can do that, but just, want to make sure that that egress is available.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
Senator. Thank you for your input. Is there a response from the agency? Please.
I would just like to clarify that HB 1622 does not go into effect until December 9th. The public summary comment report that the Education Department filed with the Office of OS is consistent with the previous statute.
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's good to know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Drew Klein. I'm chairman of the State Board of Education, and
Julie Shea, Administrative Rules Coordinator for the Department of Education. Elizabeth Brown, I'm counsel for the department.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to respond. The first point I just want to get out of the way because it keeps coming up is that the rules eliminate classroom sizes. That's not true. It's never been true. The current rules, as you see, in 306.14 and 306.12 keep in response to public comment, in response to the hearings and the input from educators that you just heard didn't happen, which actually did happen, we incorporated the current class size limits into the rules. So those do not change. And that just has to be clear because we keep seeing this misinformation, this disinformation circulated, and it's not true. We, in the conversation about class size rules, in the initial proposal, we opened it up to a conversation, and I made very clear in Board of Education meetings that we were looking at ways to give districts some flexibility to respond to parents and respond to the post-pandemic and think about what constitutes a classroom and how they might configure that. And so we thought maybe we could do ratios of educators to students. And we floated that idea, and the feedback we got was, we really feel safer if you mandate that we have class size caps. So we incorporated the existing class size caps into the rule, and they are still there.
Could you point us to where they're showing on the
So 306.14,
306.14?
they are in there.
Page 12 of the amended conditional approval request.
Page 12?
Yes.
All right.
And they've been in there for a long time. So it's simply not true that we eliminated the class size caps. Secondly, this was the longest rulemaking process, to my knowledge, in State Board of Education history. It went on for, depending on where you start the process, 3+ years with the contracting and the hearings and the input. Fred Bramante's organization that was contracted to begin this process collected input in the draft process from educators. When we began the official rulemaking process, we went through a very extensive, some people have derided it as a roadshow. I don't know why you would deride that. We did 13 listening sessions around the state. That has never happened before in the history of Board of Education rulemaking. We did 13 listening sessions going to public schools around the state, advertised, noticed, to get public input from the public and from educators and from, all school professionals. And we listened to that feedback. That feedback really helped shape our draft rules. Christine Downing, who was mentioned, was tasked with reviewing the draft rules and giving us feedback, which we took. A lot of Christine's recommendations are incorporated into these rules. We gave her over an hour, if recollection serves on the time, maybe approximately an hour, at a public meeting of the Board of Education to go over in public her last round of recommendations, in addition to the recommendations that she was making through the channels that were set up, outside of the public meetings. We had 3 public hearings. In April, we had hours and hours and hours of public hearings. And we incorporated that. You will see that the draft rules that were the initial proposal in February is vastly different than the proposal, than the final version that you have here. And that's because we took massive amounts of input. So it simply isn't true that input wasn't solicited, that input wasn't taken, and that input wasn't incorporated into it. We made tons of changes based on the input we received from the general public, from legislators, and from professional educators. And that process is laid out on the Department of Ed website as well. That's the my response. I think Julie has some response on some of the technical allegations of not providing information.
Julie Shea, Department of Education. As far as the Legislative Oversight Committee, we actually appeared twice in front of them. The first time was in June. The second time was later. And I have an email from August 19th where Representative Cordelli asked me for a copy of the final proposal, which I provided to him. I was not asked to provide any copy to the committee other than that. And in the meeting, I did say that the copy they were looking at was incorrect, but I was not the one that provided it. And then I told them where they could find that copy because I had sent it. I didn't realize that he hadn't shared it with the rest of the committee. We weren't trying to give somebody an incorrect copy. And that's what I have to say about that. And as far as the Legislative Oversight Committee, they are a committee that makes recommendations, and they did make a recommendation to us. We were invited to speak several times. At one point, as Attorney Brown mentioned earlier, she just had surgery, so she was unavailable to come to the meeting. The commissioner was also unavailable. And I, as the administrative rules coordinator, manage the administrative process of the rules. And it would not be beneficial to anybody if I showed up to that meeting alone to answer policy questions, because I am not equipped to answer questions about policy on rules. I'm happy to answer questions about the process and what we did for that, but I don't think it would have been appropriate for me to answer questions about academic standards or how any of that has moved through.
Probably only a couple of minor things that I want to point out. For the minimum standards, because these were important rules, because this was a long process, we made a determination as the department to create a separate web page for the minimum standards. It has been updated every single time there's been an action. So on that page, you'll find the initial proposal, you'll find OLS's comments to the front half and the back half. You'll find the final proposal stage. There it includes also all of the information regarding the educator cohorts, the different meetings that were had, the listening sessions, all of the list of the many listening sessions. This is the most transparent process that I have been involved in my 2.5 years at the department for rules. We have done everything we can do to make sure that folks are on the right page. And when I say that, I mean having the right copy, having the most current version of the rules that should be part of the discussion. Speaking toward the Legislative Oversight Committee, I think two comments. I did, in fact, from my bed, listen to that meeting, and Julie does properly summarize that the questions that were being asked at that meeting were very policy oriented. They were not procedure oriented. They also are policy questions that are well within the right of the legislature to revise, make changes to outside of the scope of this JLCAR. We have taken, we've had the first round of comments that we received from the OLS office to the initial proposal had substantial comments, changes, recommended revisions. Those were taken very seriously by the state board, by the department. Many hours were spent with the people at this table reviewing the comments that we received from OLS. OLS is reviewing those rules for the sole purpose of advising this committee to make sure that we follow the process, that the rules are bound in statute, and we are not overstepping our legislative authority. We worked very diligently. But this team worked very diligently together. We also met multiple times with OLS. That process resulted in what you'll see as the very minimal comments that you now see from OLS, who are advising you with respect to whether we have followed our rule process. You will see basically typographical changes is the only thing that you'll see. It indicates that your staff believe that we have followed the process at this point. And that we have made the changes that make this in compliance with the statute and the process that we are required to follow and that this committee is required to follow. And so I think most importantly, look to OLS to just the types of changes and the types of concerns that they currently have with this draft, and they are minimal concerns, which we have addressed. Second, I want to speak to legislative oversight. Legislative oversight voted in favor of the rules on the condition that we make a change to the definition of educator. After reviewing that, we did make that change in the conditional approval. It is so noted. That was submitted to OLS. That is in the draft that OLS reviewed prior to the time we came here. With respect to public comment, the law that was in effect at the time that the public comment was received and is still in effect, we were required to provide a report indicating how we had received, taken in, and responded to the public comment. In the draft that you were reviewing, we complied with the current law in so doing. I think this process has been thorough, complete, and I think that I would look, if I were on this committee, to the comments of OLS and use that as your guide with respect to whether these should be approved today. To the extent that the Legislative Oversight Committee made recommendations that they believe were not followed, they are a legislative body and we are leading into a legislative session, and those changes could be legislatively addressed, but these rules comply with current law, and I think your council and your representatives from OLS will advise you that that is in case the fact that we have done everything within the role. Importantly, I think the comment from regarding whether or not we have that these are contrary to the public interest, that's a term of art when it comes to this committee, and that is really making sure that the public has had an opportunity to be heard. And this state board has given the public multiple opportunities to be heard, 3 public hearings on these rules, and this committee has given the public opportunities to be heard, and their changes have been made to the rules based upon that comment. So there's no concern that this has not been a full vetted process and the public comment has not been considered and heard. Thank you.
Yes, and there is in fact a report on comments. It's on page 6 of the meeting packet with the revised rule, and it starts by they had 223 public comments during the initial period, and 116 of them expressed general opposition to wholesale changes but did not identify specific areas of concern. And then there are some comments that were specific, including one from Ms. Wilkie, and to make change, to incorporate the academic standards that have been approved, to attach those by reference, changed the word curriculum to program, and may include was deleted throughout the proposal. And as I said, the class size limitation was recopied from the currently approved rules. So I can't say that the Board of Education did not follow the process and listen to the public. They may not have incorporated all the comments, particularly those that are policy issues, but they have in fact received the comments and acted on many of them. Any other comments or questions, Representative Baroda?
Thank you. I do have a comment. Referring to House Bill 1622's starting date on December 9th, it was used in the previous rules as a reason to step back. So I don't know how we would not apply it to this rule as well, even though it's not in effect, the intent is there. Number two, one of the things about public hearings is that they are to be transparent. And when someone from the chair has a meeting with, and I'm not looking at either one of you as that, when the chair when the commissioner of a department meets with a member of the commission or a committee, and then reports back to the committee and is not there to have a public discussion at a public hearing, that is an issue of transparency. Number three, House Bill 1671 and 1691 were attempts in the last term to address some of the changes that are made in these rules, and those bills did not pass. They failed in the House. Therefore, that shows legislative intent that the changes in these documents are against legislative intent, which is another component of our reasons to object. Number three, there was no discussion this year in the last year of this term. House Bill 1107 passed the House and was signed by the governor, and it is meant to update the frameworks. So why would we use frameworks that are decades old when they're meant to be updated and have been asked to be updated by the legislature? Another legislative intent point.
Would you please answer the question about the frameworks, because that seems worrisome?
Well, I would be happy to do that. We incorporated, I assume you're talking about the state's academic standards,
Yes.
right? Okay. Anybody here who's not familiar with the process of updating the state academic standards might not understand that it takes years for each one. When I first got on the board, we did some of those, and it's approximately 2-year process to update academic standards. I have right here the academic standards that have not been updated. This would take, each one of these would take years to do. It is not realistic or advisable to hold the update of the minimum standards until we take probably 12 to 16 years to update all of these academic standards. They are incorporated by reference, because these are the standards we have. Most of these are Common Core standards. So I know we've had lots of arguments about those over the years. Updates to those would change the Common Core standards. We are keeping them in place when they come up for their proper renewal. The intent is to take them up and renew them, but it takes a lot of work. We're a small board, and we take these standards updates very seriously, and we want to give them our complete attention. It's simply not realistic or practical to hold up the 306s until every academic standard can be updated.
Yes, and I would mention that the 306 rules could be very quickly amended if you needed to update the version of the academic standards.
And that, Madam Chairman, is why we incorporated it by rule, right? So the 306s previously would have to be amended themselves if they had these written into them. Because we incorporated them by rule, we can update these academic standards without going back and reopening the 306 is much more efficient.
And may I assume that the Board of Education is planning to actually update those on a planned schedule? And which academic standard are you currently in the middle of?
We are not in the, well, we had social studies before COVID. We were working on that, and we made a lot of progress, and it got disrupted by the COVID process. That would be the one that we would probably take up first. But there's a lot of them that really do require attention and revision, and we intend to get to those.
Do you have a schedule or a plan, I hope?
I have a spreadsheet of all of the standards, when they were adopted, when they're due to be reviewed, and we're starting to work on what that will look like. I do also want to point out in the front half, we did adopt a new rule that shows a process by which the state board will not only take up academic standards, but review them on a 10-year period. Prior to that and the legislative update, there was no timeline for updating academic standards like there is for rules. And so now that we've set that in place, we now have a mechanism where we will have a schedule to update these standards and make sure that they're reviewed. And again, as Chairman Klein stated, it doesn't make sense to not update the rules with these standards because they haven't been updated. The process now that they're in rule is to now look at them and update them and use the expedited process to change the incorporated references as necessary once we update them. And that will be a much quicker and administratively efficient process.
Thank you,
And
Representative.
that rule is Ed 306.26. It is on page 33 of the amended conditional approval request.
Thank you.
And just to the point, we also received a lot of public input regarding the academic standards and the fact that there was no review cycle, which is one of the reasons why I took the lead in drafting this rule. So we would have a process established in our rules because it wasn't established by statute and it wasn't previously established by rule. So yes, it's the last page that you should look at,
Thank
page
you.
33.
Representative Groh, do you have a quick question?
I do, Madam Chair. I'm sorry that you have so much paperwork, but I can assure you we do too. And that's part of the work, part of the job, and the reason why we're here. And my comment is, why would we adopt rules that are as old as 2001, and in the case of social studies, 2005? And why did you not update these frameworks if they were so meaningful to the department or to the school districts?
No speeches, please. They have already stated they are instituting a planned update of all of their standards, and I believe social studies is the first one. Representative Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had actually been somewhat troubled by the Common Core inclusion, but as I looked at it, I appreciate the process that you have for updating the academic standards. I wanted to speak to Representative Grote's comment about the previous rule referencing House Bill 1622. It did not. There are the existing standards for considering public comment pursuant to RSA 541-A11. There are already standards there, and I was referencing those and not specifically House Bill 1622. Quite frankly, it would have been very convenient to speak to the fact that there's been so much public comment and we want to understand how it's been included. But when you look at it and you look at the volume of work, both in this and in the landfill one, if we were to do that and have them go back through their work, go and dissect what they did, what they included, when and where, that process would probably add a year to both of the rules. And I know that people who don't like the rules would be happy about that, but it also would just grind things to a halt. We already dealt with that with COVID, with everything else that came up and took people's focus off of the normal process of government and dealt with the new crises that we had. Trying to take a law that we have and then go retrospectively to apply it to a process wouldn't be appropriate, as convenient as proponents might find it. And quite frankly, it would have been nice to have that on the landfill, but we can't do that. We can't change the conditions prior to the effective date of a law.
Yes.
And so we move forward, and it'll be great to have this transparency, but we can't go back and change the past on this. So we move forward, and I believe that the process has been pretty extensive. I've worked with the education, and I've worked with the people in that committee. And I know there's always viewpoint differences, but I believe in the process.
Actually, the landfill rules do have a fairly extensive report on how they address public comments. And it is full of technical details that I can't evaluate if it shows they incorporated them or not, but they're there. Representative Fellows, you had a question?
Yes, within RSA N21, there's a description of the Department of Education and the bureaus, the divisions and the bureaus, and one of those bureaus has a responsibility to maintain and update the standards, the minimum standards. So I really don't understand why, since there's staff available, that there has no work has been done on updating these frameworks.
Senator Whitley's right
Can you
here.
explain that?
Senator Whitley's right here. Sally's not sitting in for anybody.
Without speaking directly to that state law, it's the Board of Education that takes up the state standards, and we're charged with reviewing them, adopting them, and again, there's a process to do this. But and just to Representative Grote's point, I'm not complaining about the paperwork or the work burden. I love this work, so you won't hear. That's not a complaint to point out that this is a lot of work. We are obligated to update the rules every 10 years. It's a conveyor belt, right? So every state board meeting, we have new rules that have expired or are going to expire that we have to update. And that's a lot of work, and the 306s were a lot of work. The minimum standards or the academic standards aren't on that same conveyor belt. So our workload is such that we do look for opportunities to take up those, but our focus is on doing our obligation to update the rules. So, I mean, that is kind of how it works on the state board with a 7-member board with no staff. And just to point out, I mean, the department has been amazing, but the Board of Education itself has no staff. And we're part-time volunteers. So these things get taken up, we think, an appropriate rate. But I just want to maybe point out that I think I fail to understand the argument that we can't change the 306s and we should keep the 306s the way they are in current form because the 306s are responsible for our high academic achievement in New Hampshire. And yet the academic standards have to be changed, and it's unacceptable that we don't change those. Those two arguments are not compatible.
Thank you. And I would like to mention your staff has apparently decided that you will be reviewing the academic standards on a schedule.
Which is good, and I support that. And I was glad to see that in the rule because that, I think that's necessary.
That's probably,
Madam
to
Chair.
a large degree, more important than your rules.
Yes, and in many cases, that's more important.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
I have a follow-up question, please.
Brief one, please.
Yes, it is indeed brief. So it is my understanding and that the board, the State Board of Education, by statute, is supposed to be composed of people who do not have professional education experience, and that the Department of Education, that is why, one reason, that the Department of Education and the staff that it employs who is charged with maintaining and revising rules are professional educators. Would you like to respond
Any
to that?
change to that is obviously a matter of policy and not of the rule.
I'm referring to statute. Those are statutory requirements
Thank
that the
you.
board cannot be professional educators, but the Department of Education has staff who are and can develop rules,
Thank you.
develop frameworks I'm talking about, sorry.
Senator Whitley, you had a question?
I just didn't know if they wanted to respond.
It's okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to address an issue and ask a further question. There was a representation made by the chair about that there was, quote, disinformation about class size ratio, and I think that's a very unfair characterization.
No, it's
You
not.
have many qualified educators who have provided hours and hours, folks that are in the field, administrators that are in the field, sharing information about how there is clear confusion in the language here over how many certified teachers must be in a class with students. And so, I want to ask you to respond to that, why it's disinformation when there's clear confusion.
Excuse me,
So that's
Senator
the
Whitley,
first.
the disinformation is that people were responding to the preliminary rule after it had been changed by the Board of Education to be exactly the same as the current rule, which does have specific limits.
Well, we'll let him respond because my understanding was the disinformation was over the class size
Well-
ratio. And my second point to that, if you can respond to, is sort of, this is a very substantive, based on what the qualified educators, administrators are saying about this confusion, about how it is making a substantive change about, you know, that's really not directed by the legislature. Sort of what is the authority to go beyond that authority?
We've not gone beyond any authority. That's incorrect. The disinformation is, as Chairman McGuire said, we months ago, and I don't remember the exact timeline here, somebody could look it up if they wanted to, incorporated the current class size ratios into the new rules. We made a point of stating that fact at the board meeting. We put the rules out there, and after that fact, people continue to falsely claim that there's no class size ratio in there. That's the disinformation.
Yes, I got an email just yesterday that said that we need to have class size ratios in these rules.
Follow up, please.
Yes.
Right. But the information that is being provided is not disinformation because you're looking at what people are doing is looking at the totality of the rules in addition to the definition of an educator.
In
I'm sorry,
Senator, in 306.14, the class size ratios are in the rule. So it's disinformation to say that they're not there.
So in the initial proposal, the class sizes were removed. There were extensive comments on that. In the next proposed draft, the class size section was added back into the rules specifically based on that comment. That's why it removed my comment on the state educator ratios, because they put it back in. It is in 306.14, and it says clearly the school board shall establish student educator ratios. An educator has been changed to the definition in 21 in 8D, which says teacher and certified paraprofessional. The ratios that promote student learning for each learning opportunity and learning level based upon school safety policies, content, instructional method, the characteristics of learners, and the following. Kindergarten, grade through 2, 25 students or fewer per educator. Grades 3 through 5, 30 students fewer per educator. And middle school and high school, 30 students or fewer per educator. It also has aspirations that they try to have lower ratios, but they have set a maximum.
Follow up.
Follow up.
So what I think the confusion is, you have to read these rules together. And so the concern is the definition of educator, just as you're describing. So the concern is there is little clarification about how many certified teachers are in a classroom. And that is the concern when you're reading the ratio with the definition of educator. There is confusion about how many certified teachers are required. The term educator is including certified paraprofessional.
It is not.
You do have to read the rules as a whole. And I would like to point out 306.12 says you must have an educator with their content area leading a class. A certified paraprofessional cannot teach a class. They have to be certified in their area. So that is, when you read those together, each classroom for each learning opportunity. So again, each learning opportunity has to have these ratios. A teacher who is credentialed in their content area. So in a social studies class, a teacher who is certified in social studies must be teaching that class.
Thank you. Senator Chandler?
Thank you. I have just a very quick question that might perhaps explain, maybe not, some of the confusion. And I'm just wondering if the conditional approval request for the 306 is currently on the Department of Education's website.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yes, but I will say that from the comments from the public, many people have not fully analyzed the latest version And that is something that is very common in the legislative process as well as the rulemaking process. Representative Fellows?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you just made the remark that the ratio is based on teachers who are credentialed in the particular class area. But this rule does not say teacher, it says educator. And you have also just told us recently that educator means certified teacher or
Teacher or certified paraeducator.
Teacher or certified paraprofessional. That particular RSA that you're referencing was written only a year ago and adopted a year ago. And the purpose of that particular RSA is to describe a grant program to encourage teachers and paraprofessionals to be recruited and educated so that they can increase the number of teachers and paraprofessionals available to our schools, because we know there are shortages of that. How that definition in that statute applies only to that statute, and there is nothing else in all the rest of the statutes that can support your definition that in a classroom you should be using teachers and paraprofessionals as if they are educators.
So the statute in 2198D is used by the department because they are bound by 541A to use the statutory definition of educator, and it is the only definition of educator in the entire statute set. So they use the definition that they could use, and like Julie Shea said, if you read the rules together, it does not mean that a certified paraprofessional would be considered in the educator student ratio. You have to read the rules together. You can't pull out this one rule and say the definition is not correct. The definition is teacher or paraprofessional. When you're using the word educator in the ratios, it means teacher.
If they mean
Excuse
teacher,
me,
they should
Representative
say
Fellows,
teacher.
you've made your point. Please don't argue. Representative Hacken Phillips?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am concerned with this definitional change, and I believe there are downstream unimplicated effects that this will bring about. And specifically, I'm thinking about the 2018 final report of the Committee to Study Education Funding and the Cost of an Opportunity for an Adequate Education. In that report, the legislature noted, when determining the costs of an adequate education, classroom maximums are used when updating the calculations for per pupil costs. This calculation was not developed based on class size ratios, and so I think it is unknown what type of fiscal impact the shift to class size ratios may have on our funding obligations. Specifically, when you shift, it creates an opportunity specifically for downshifting of state funding obligations to localities if local districts are determining to offer more than the minimum framework requirements in a way that was not previously happening. So in addition, when you look at that committee's final report, state funding obligations are determined by student teacher class maximums in accordance with ESSA standards. And when you switch from the class size maximum to class size ratios, and when that isn't enacted, it will disrupt current funding obligations because of the way that that is calculated. And I believe that the Department of Education will need to evaluate which districts are out of compliance and to calculate the different funding obligations when these rules are put into effect. I think both will create additional administrative costs on a local level and a statewide level and possibly change our funding obligations. But I'll note that there have been no fiscal notes for either these local or statewide department costs included in the proposal for these rules. I think the purpose of the state is to supply an adequate education, and this will have a significant impact, economic impact locally and statewide. And the public has a right to know whether it's a positive or a negative local or statewide impact. And none of this has been fully vetted. And I think this is another basis for an objection to these rules. There is the possibility and opportunity for an economic impact here that has not been fully vetted. And I do believe that we need to take more time to look into that.
The fiscal
could
impacts
respond.
for this proposal.
Mr. Klein,
were-
you were going to respond to that?
Yeah, again, as was just stated for quite a while now, the class size ratios are in these rules. They were not removed. There is no change to the class size ratios. One of the responses we got when we floated the idea of going to ratios instead of hard caps was exactly that point you had made about calculating funding. So in response to the feedback, again, we incorporated the class size caps into these proposed rules. They're in there in 306.14 and 306.12. It makes clear that you cannot lead a class unless you're certified in that subject matter. So paraprofessionals under these rules may not teach classes. So those are myths, those are misunderstandings. They're not true. Class size caps are in, and only certified licensed teachers can teach classes.
Thank you.
Also,
Representative
the
Leon?
fiscal impact statements were done by the legislative budget assistant, and both proposals have fiscal impact statements. I do not know the scope of how far they go through what they're doing a fiscal impact statement on the rule text. They don't go further than that.
They have never been included in any of our packets, so this is new information to the legislature.
The fiscal impact statements are in all of the packets.
Representative Leon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The current rules state kindergarten, grade 2, 25 students or fewer per educator. It wasn't previously defined as, I don't know if it was defined as educator. This is not a change in language at all. Objecting to language that is currently in statutes, I don't think makes sense.
Yeah,
So I
and
just wanted to
that is no change from the previous rule. Okay, anyone else? Question?
I move to
Senator Ward?
approve.
Okay. Senator Ward has moved to approve, seconded by Representative Leon. Any further comments, questions?
Yes. I think we need to take some time to lay out why, I will not be voting for the approval. I think there's multiple basis for objections, and I will defer to some House members to discuss those objections.
I think we've heard them. Representative Hacken Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to take a moment to focus on the first half of the rules and the public comment. According to OLS and our Legislative Administrative Rules Office, it's unusual for any rule to change and attract public comment submissions totaling more than a dozen responses. It's highly unusual for a rule change to attract more than 200 responses. And in this case, more than half of the 223 public comment submissions were characterized to be in general opposition to the changes that the Department of Education initially proposed. So rather than reflecting upon more than 50% return in these negative responses to the proposed changes and determining the merits of those highly unusual submission rates for public comment, the State Board and the Department of Education effectively overruled the 50% of the public comment submissions without providing any evidence on the merits as to why it should dismiss the generalized opposition and why it concluded the proposal should continue. So for instance, there was no discussion about why the existing rules for our public schools are in need of substantial change, although there was no legislative directive to do so, and such changes were contrary to the unusually high rate of public opposition. The Department of Education and the State Board did not provide full analysis of the remaining 107 public comment submissions to substantiate the merits of moving forward with the proposal. And it is worth noting that JLCAR has not been informed whether any of the 107 remaining public comments were generally positive in support of the proposed changes and whether the Department Education investigated or evaluated the merits of those claims. Instead, the final proposal responded to 9 issue areas of the Education 306 rules that were publicly commented upon, citing approximately 25 parties' submissions. But the final proposal does not address any responses to the approximately 82 remaining party submissions and whether those comments were evaluated or incorporated based on the merits. So this summer, when the department's commissioner testified before the legislature that some of the department public comments had conflicted with other public comment submissions, but the department never provided any detail about those conflicting comments. More concerning, however, the department's failure to provide evidence for evaluating the merits of those comments or determining which side of the conflicting comments were deemed correct or valuable, and whether those comments or any proportion thereof were incorporated. So instead, the department's final proposal provided a link to its website with all the public testimony so that JLCAR and thereby the public could independently perform the administrative work of evaluating the remaining 82 comments. And what is most concerning is that JLCAR and the public are left wondering how the department determined the merits for each and why it decided not to respond. So I read through the 593 pages of the initial public comment period for the front half of the rules, and I found one positive comment for the proposal, which can generally be located on page 329. So that's correct. One of the 223 public comments can be generally characterized in support of the changes for the Education 306 rules. And interestingly, the single comment's general praise was centered around the particular individual advancing competency-based learning in New Hampshire, but that point was competency-based learning and which type should be advanced was later then contradicted by numerous other submissions. So again, the department has provided no explanation for how it interpreted the particular conflict of opinion and which side of the discussion, if at all, has been incorporated. So the pervasive theme here is that dozens of public comment submissions in that final proposal is watering down the existing minimum standards for students, including the removal of class size maximum caps for class ratios that does not include the method for calculating those ratios, or the reference change from courses to learning opportunities, which has been alleged to further exacerbate the inequalities and inequities across the state's public schools. The department does not address this concern or present evidence that the changes would actually strengthen our standards, thus overriding the vast majority of these public comments. So, you can look to page 47. The DeMarks from Meredith noted that there's been no research-based evidence shared by the department to justify its proposed changes to these existing rules, which they believe is a disregard for the democratic process. There are additional multiple opportunities and public comments that were never responded to. So the members of JLCAR have noticed the dozens of emails addressed to us that have come into our inbox this season, urging us to vote no on the final proposed Ed 306 rules. I've skimmed my legislative email inbox and I cannot find a single email urging support for this. What is of greatest concern to JLCAR is that in the absence of the legislative directive to significantly change the 306 rules, the department seems to be overriding the overwhelming public disapproval of this proposal without providing evidentiary support for doing so. And specifically today, I'm seeing that there are volumes of stakeholder input compiled by Christine Downey and educators across the state who are very concerned about the legislative intent and the authority of the agency to advance these rules without incorporating in a meaningful way their public input. In fact, I don't believe that they are permitted to speak today in today's testimony, even though they are here, prepared to give testimony in the room, which I find is another piece of evidence where the public comment is not being fully, meaningfully heard and taken into account by our state. I do believe we can do better. I do believe it's against the public interest to move forward without really having the department substantiate its position in a transparent way. So there is evidence to believe that, despite the reassurances we have heard over and over again, that the department has a greater obligation to fully provide the evidence and its evaluation of this public comment period. I think we can do better, and I believe that the public demands of it. Thank you.
Just to be clear, I did receive public testimony for this JLCAR meeting on these rules. I evaluated the public testimony that I received, and all of them were referring to the original draft of the rules. They are not relevant here, which is why I did not write a summary of them. The rules, the testimony that I have on my desk now was given to me this morning before the meeting. It has not been evaluated yet.
Madam Chair, can I just
And
respond to that briefly?
just to be clear too, your fiscal impact statement is on page 7 of the 2024-41 FP meeting packet and the 2020-44-2 meeting packet on page 4. There are 2 fiscal impacts for these rules.
Thank you.
May I just briefly
Please.
respond? I do think that this is a due notice argument. We are concerned that members of the general public today do not understand which form of the rules we are moving to approve. I think there is a concern about what notice has been given and what the actual public believes we are doing today. My concern is that the first public hearings that were held, as we've heard, quite a long time ago, more than a year in some cases, there has not been a meaningful opportunity for additional public input with a public hearing after these rules have been changed. So we have multiple iterations of a new form of this set of 306 rules without a single moment in time where the public has been able to weigh in with real-time feedback to those changes, and to have that real-time feedback incorporated into the new set of rules. So I am pumping the brakes here. I do believe there is a public interest concern worth evaluating.
If I may respond to that. First of all, I do want to point out that these rules were set to expire in March of 2024. So if we did not move forward with changes, we would have no rules. And so that is why we're moving forward. Additionally, we are not required by 541A to offer any additional public hearings beyond the ones we offered, not to say that we wouldn't. However, the monthly state board meetings offer public comment at the beginning of every single meeting. Now, if it's not, earmarked as minimum standards public comment, people can still come and speak, and they have. And people have had ample opportunity to make their feelings known on the proposal. Additionally, we did release and post on our website, which was not required of us, all of the public comment so that everybody could see it. A lot of the public comment was general opposition, which you can understand, but there's not anything that we can do to make changes based on that. We have to move the rules forward.
The rules were set to expire. They're under an extension from 541A 14A, meaning after JLCAR final action, they will be valid for 30 days if the department does not adopt. So several of these rule sections are set to expire when this process is over.
Thank you, Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be clear about the basis for an objection, which is why I believe strongly that we should all vote against the motion to approve. One, that these rules are contrary to legislative intent. 2, these rules are contrary to the public interest. And 3, based on the economic impact of these rules. These are 3 bases for objection. I've been on JLCAR now 4 years. I've never seen a stronger case for an objection. I've never seen a stronger public outcry asking us to object. And so I just wanted to make sure that was clearly on the record.
Thank you. Anyone, Director Morrell?
With your permission, I'd like to briefly explain how and why we have different versions for the public's benefit. Okay.
Please.
In February, the board approved its initial proposal. I think that may have been somewhat hurried. That's my own opinion, because they were heading towards a expiration date of the current rules. There were significant changes in it. For example, the educator-pupil ratio was going to be left up to the individual districts. After the initial proposal, public comment was received. The department drafted its final proposal. It was based on public comments, their own concerns, and OLS comments. The final proposal was approved by the board in August 14th of this year. They filed that final proposal with us. I'm not sure if it was before the conditional approval, but on
8/19.
Yeah, September 12th, conditional approval was approved by the board. That amended, when the final proposal was sent to us, OLS, the committee's attorneys, review that and make comments on that. The board then reviewed those and said, yes, we can make some further changes, thus the conditional approval. Last month, the committee heard testimony on this proposal, and subsequent to that, the board also did an amended conditional approval to make further changes. And that's what the committee is considering today, the amended conditional approval. So it is essentially the fourth draft of the rules.
And all of these drafts have been posted on the education website. I've followed them on the website. Our process is not, we don't post every proposal that is filed, but we have all of our files are open record for anyone. If they ask me for any proposal or any proposal with my comments on it, they will get it.
Okay. Senator Gray?
Point of order. I'm wondering whether or not, we have a motion in front of us, but I'm wondering whether an objection would be a higher priority. I've heard one senator and one representative say that, they believe that they have grounds for an objection. If we can deal with that, then we can get on with the rest of it, if that motion fails.
Does anyone in the staff know what the priority of motions is?
The first motion has to be removed.
Okay, it has to be removed. The easiest way to remove it is to vote on it. If that is agreeable? Senator Chanley, I believe you had a comment?
Yes, and I acknowledge Senator Gray's point that we are discussing, we are in the middle, we have a motion on the floor. But I was curious, we've talked about this version, that version. I asked, is the conditional approval version on the Department of Education's website? The answer was yes. I was trying to, part of the reason when you click on it, it says page not found. Now I may be doing something wrong, but that is what I am getting. So I don't know. So my concern is, at least I just raised the issue that it isn't necessarily for lack of trying that people are not working from the correct version. I just wanted
Thank
to
you
make
for
that
that
comment.
information. Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to acknowledge that a tremendous amount of effort has gone into this on the part of all the parties who are involved closely. It's not for lack of effort, but this is very complex in procedurally and structurally and so forth. And so the fact that the public is not completely on board or completely informed is a simple fact. They're not. That's not for a lack of trying. I think we've come a long way. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think these rules should be approved at this time. And so I'm going to be voting to object if we ever get there, and I'm going to be voting no on the approval motion if we have to come to that vote first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I request a roll call, please.
Certainly. Okay. Representative Lynn, you have a comment?
No, I thought we were ready to vote.
Okay, fine. We will be doing this as a roll call. Representative Grota?
Could we clarify what is the motion?
The motion is to accept the final proposal
Okay, it's the
approve the final proposal and the
Thank you.
amended conditional approval request.
Madam Chair, wouldn't we need to hear the second half of the 42 proposal?
No,
before that
this
motion?
is only on 41. This vote,
Oh.
this motion and this vote is only on 41.
Fine. This is the first to packet. All right. Representative Grota.
No.
Representative Leon.
Yes.
Representative Lynn. Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Chanley,
No.
Senator, let's see, Representative Doucette for Senator
Yes.
Ennis. Senator Ward. Senator Whitley.
No.
And I vote yes, so that's that. The motion passes 6-4. And it's 10:30. I think we should take a 10-minute break. everybody. We've had 15 minutes of our 10-minute break. That's normal. Okay, we are resuming on final proposal 2024-42 minimum academic standards.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to ask, fervently request that we provide opportunity for people that
Yes,
came out.
I was reminded that we need to provide opportunity for public comment.
Thank you.
The previous set of rules, we had public comment last month, and that's why I was only going to have a procedural comment from the representatives, and if anyone had new information, but this one is the first time we've dealt with this package, therefore we will have public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So this is 2024-42. It includes Ed 306.27 through Ed 306.239. It is the minimum academic standards for public schools. On October 29th, the Legislative Oversight Committee for the Education Improvement and Assessment Program voted 4-2 to recommend support for this proposal, and there were no recommendations for this half of the rules. I have no further substantive comments.
Thank you. So there are no comments. We're going to open it to public testimony, and I will specifically ask that you not duplicate previous speakers. Mrs. Rochers? Oh, she stepped out. Okay. And I am not intending to give everybody 15 minutes because that will be duplicative. What?
Did you say after Derosa?
Yes.
She is here.
She is here? Oh, thank you. I didn't see you. Please, please speak.
Hello, my name is Ashley DeRocher. I'm a resident of Rochester, New Hampshire. I'm a mother and my child goes to Rochester schools. I'm here today specifically to speak, one, as a parent, as a taxpayer, and as a concerned citizen. I want to emphasize first that the fact that I wasn't able to speak for the first part of these rules speaks to a larger issue here that public interest is not being considered, which is a factor in objecting to these first part of these rules that went through. There is clear confusion and concern from citizens and people in this state regarding the changes of the 306 rules. However, it moves forward regardless. As it relates to minimum standards, the Legislative Oversight Committee has not reviewed such frameworks that are being described as being changed. Why is that? Where's the public interest in this matter? Are we informed about such frameworks? What are they? They're not clear to us. As a parent, I'm not being informed about such frameworks. There's also the word program. What does that mean? They talked earlier about how the minimum standards, there's no schedule. They don't even know what they are. There's a lot of word salad around that. So I want to understand that, and it's not clear. So there's now to be a vote on these minimum standards that we're hearing. There's no schedule to even change them. Oh, well, we haven't had the time. There's no staff. Such excuses, there's absolutely no excuse for that. This is their job. But yet all this time has been taken to change these 306 rules. This doesn't make sense. And I explained this to Madam Chair in the fact that there's all this public outcry saying that, hey, we don't like this, and there's not a lot of specifics around why we don't like it. Well, maybe because there's inconsistencies and it's confusing, which again gives more reason to object. And if the Legislative Oversight Committee did not have the ability to review minimum standards Is it because there aren't any minimum standards? What are the standards? What are the frameworks? Are there any? How could there be any frameworks or standards if they're not present? It's contradicting and it's contradictory and it's concerning. How could we fund something? How could we pay for something? How could we send our children to schools for something if we don't know what we're sending them to? I'll pause for a second because I want to read something that's very important. Please bear with me. I also want to emphasize, and I said this to a couple members and the chairwoman, I understand that the general court website does have the updated versions and the unconditional approval as such. But as it was stated by, I can't remember her name, Julie, who is up here for the Commissioner of Education, Department of Education, that their website had the updated rules. The page was not found when clicked on that link. And it was 5 days of that, and I had been looking at that. So for any parent, any person in the public, anyone trying to see that and was being told or maybe thought that it was there, it says the page isn't found, which one could lead somebody to believe, well, this service, this part of the government, is not functioning for me. Or maybe it's in the process of being updated again. Maybe it's under construction. Maybe nothing's happening with this. Where would that lead us? That's not one, it's not transparent. It leads us to wonder what's going on in the first place. Maybe it could have said, hey, the page is not found. Please refer to the general court website. That didn't happen. That's not transparent. I'm looking for a quote that's very important. It's by Thomas Jefferson, and it's regards to education. So Thomas Jefferson recognized that education is fundamental to democracy. Only educated people can accurately evaluate the governmental policies that will truly benefit them. Is the committee, this JLCAR committee, even educated on what we are voting on today? I'm not even educated on it. I don't know. What are the standards? This is not in the interest of the public. We don't even know. Jefferson wrote to a colleague about public education in 1786. No other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness. Preach, my dear sir, a crusade against ignorance, and establish and improve the law for educating the common people. Let our countrymen know that the people alone can protect against the evils of kings, nobles, and priests, and that the tax which will be paid for this purpose is not more than the 1,000th part of what will be paid to the kings and priests and nobles who will rise up among us if we leave the people in ignorance. Please object to this part of the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Louise Wilson. Ms. Wilson? Okay, well, thank you. Marcia McCaffrey?
Good morning. My name is Marcia McCaffrey. I reside in the village of Kentucky. I retired from state service 2 years ago, but for 23 years, from 1999 until 2022, I was the state arts consultant at the Department of Education. I'm here to speak on behalf of all the people from around the state who provided feedback and testimony regarding the revision of ED 306 standards during public hearings, particularly those in support of systematic and sequential art, music, and physical education programs in our schools. I'd like to add that I had put in a request to provide this testimony for the first packet. So I am being called now while this is part of the second packet. So I will modify my statements. Many of my concerns were addressed. Testimony from Representative Myler, particularly around House Bill 1622. The timeline for that is to go into effect is December 9th. That is a mere 10 business days from today. And the first half, which has already been voted on, my recommendation was to have this deliberative body request a public comment report on that half. I do believe there is still time because the second half is for JLCAR is December 30th. So I believe that would fall into the timeline for requesting a report of public comment. I think that what became very clear to me in the first half for the packet of the first half of these standards is that there is a great deal of confusion. I just went on my phone to look up the final proposal, which I studied for many hours last night. I pulled it up on the Department of Ed website. Now I don't even know if that's really the final proposal. I don't know anymore. I am very confused, and I am very adept at understanding this process. I've been involved in ED 306 revisions for 3 times. And I would also like to, at this moment, speak to frameworks being embedded in ED 306, and that does apply to this second half, the back half. The Arts Curricular Framework, I was the lead for that for the 2001 Curricular Framework, which is referenced in the final proposal of the ED 306 standards. That's a curricular framework that identifies proficiency standards by the end of grade 4, by the end of grade 8, and by the end of grade 12. That is a document by which local school districts are then to build a sequential and systematic curriculum. And those are targets at end of those grade levels. My concern as I read these ED 306 is that if those are what schools have to follow, they can just offer programs at end of 4th grade. They do not have to offer to all students a sequential opportunity for learning in any of our content areas. And if this is the input system, this current version also changes language from will provide to the local school board will ensure. Well, how does one measure an insurance? If it's our input system, why aren't we asking local school boards to provide rather than just ensure? And words really do matter. And these are the concerns I have looking at it from someone with over 20 years of experience going into schools and reviewing for adequacy and reviewing schools against minimum standards. How might we measure those inputs? So I do believe there are many strong aspects. I also know that the state has been on a trajectory of competency-based education for 25 years. And the standards, as I read the final proposal, are a continuation of that pathway for competency-based education. I still believe there is confusion about what is competency-based education. And I do believe that there is no rollout plan that the department has win these standards, because eventually they will pass, there needs to be better communication about the whole concept of these standards, what these mean to schools and communities, what these opportunities are for students, and how this makes is progress. Because the standards as they were pretty darn good. And so to make changes that represent something more of a reimagining of our standards, I think takes more effort from the Department of Education. And I would be very interested in seeing the sequence, the cadence of standards, academic standards revision. That would be very important to include in a rollout plan and a communication tool. I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it would be useful if the Board of Education were to publish their schedule of updates to those standards. And David Trumbull?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Like the previous guests, I was prepared to speak about part one with new arguments about the most recent regulations and was not given the opportunity, but I will respect what's happened and just go right on to part two. Part two also suffers from the fact that it doesn't comply with the New Hampshire statutes. New Hampshire statutes require that schools shall provide instruction, and also that they shall use an input-based accountability system. The proposed regulations do neither of those two things. So first of all, the current regulations and statutes require that that schools provide instruction, that's the how, curriculum, that's the what, and teachers, that is the who. For each subject in this thing, you'll see there's 13 subjects. It's broken down into an A, a B, and a C. The A is the elementary, the B is the middle, and the C is the high school. The proposed regulations remove the requirement of a program that provides instruction and replaces it instead with learning opportunities offered. So what is the difference? The curriculum is the what? The curriculum is a list of topics, ideas, and materials. It has no action without instruction, which means the presence of educators. And who is an educator under the regulations? Under the current regulations, an educator must be a teacher. That's in 30602 definition of educator, because it refers you right over to another statute that is solely for teachers. Under the proposed regulation, an educator can be a teacher or a paraprofessional. So the first thing these new regulations do is get rid of the role of teachers. The second thing is that instruction is the how, which is done by educators. It's led by teachers. These regulations get rid of instruction. There is no requirement that you provide instruction in the proposed regulations. Learning opportunities is what they give you as their new idea for the future of education. Now, I think learning opportunities are great if they're added onto instruction from teachers, but to replace instruction, it would be a major error for our state. They are vaguely defined. How many learning opportunities must be provided to every student? We have no idea. And how many students will actually access these ideas? Right now, the regulations you have give you a solid guarantee. The proposal regulations remove the role of the teacher and they remove the role of instruction. Now, you might say, what statute is in violation? RSA 18924, the standard school statute, says a few things of relevance to us. First is that the schools must be taught by teachers, That's in the statute, who hold valid credentials. It also says a standard school shall provide instruction in all subjects. You have to provide instruction. The previous witness just told you the importance of the word provide. That's different than offering an opportunity. You have to provide instruction. Sometimes this gets confusing. Look at it this way. If you're taking a road trip across the country You go to Google Maps, you got the little blue line that shows you where you're going. That's curriculum. Instruction is what happens at each stop along the way, where the teachers teach students at stop 1, at stop 2, at stop 3, all the way through stop 180. That's the difference between curriculum and instruction. Also, the previous speaker mentioned inputs. I would refer you to RSA 193E3-B. It's the accountability for the opportunity for an adequate education. It says, first sentence, using the input-based accountability system, a school shall demonstrate that it provides the opportunity for an adequate education under RSA 193E2A by meeting the requirements of paragraphs 1 and 2 of the section. 1 is the inputs, and part 2 is the output system. Outputs means how do you assess what happened? What these regulations have done is put everything on outputs. It's entirely a curriculum based on an evaluation of competencies. But there's no guarantee that there's any actual instruction taking place. There's no guarantee of inputs. The inputs would be removed. And this could have a massive implication. Maybe in the property-rich towns it won't make a big difference because those towns will continue to provide all the inputs that are needed. But in the property-poor towns, when they find out that they don't have to provide inputs, you are now endangering the education of communities throughout this entire state. That would be a major problem because the future of our country depends upon it. Also, I would also ask you to look at a couple of other regulations. There's 13 subjects. I mentioned there's an A, a B, and a C. Let's just take one example just to bring it home. Mathematics. Let's just take subpoint C, high school mathematics. The current regulation has 13 things that have to be provided in the program. There are opportunities, planned activities, concrete experiences, interdisciplinary interactions, sustained projects, interactive instruction, and curriculum. What it's replaced with is a requirement that you have a curriculum based on competencies. That's it. Then it says, to the school boards, you can use the Common Core standard for mathematics, and that's fine, but that's just the roadmap. There's no provision, no requirement that anything actually be provided. It tells school boards, if you don't like Common Core, you can write your own. How many school boards in the state are going to write their own curriculum for all 3 levels of schools for all 13 subjects? And then it also refers you into the other 2 sections to a couple of other sections in the regs, which provide no details, no instruction, no how to make a satisfactory curriculum. So what I want to put you back to is this. The current regulations are strong. They require educators be teachers. And just to look at 30602, educator means any professional employee of any school district whose position requires certification by the state board pursuant to RSA 18939. The term includes administrators, specialists, and teachers. And if you look up RSA 18939, the whole section is called teachers. How are they chosen? School boards select teachers. In the present regulations in every school right now, you have to have teachers leading the classrooms. If you're going to have 25 children, you got to have at least 1 teacher. If you're going to have 50 kids in a classroom, you would need 2 teachers. Under the proposed regulations, you would not need 2 teachers because an educator can be a teacher or a paraprofessional. That affects not only the discussion in part 1, it affects the discussion in part 2, because in part 2, you're implementing it. The who is the teacher. Without the teacher, you can't have guaranteed quality instruction. I want to be clear. I'm not against paraprofessionals. My wife is a lifetime special ed teacher. Every night at dinner, we talk about what happened in public school today. And the paraprofessionals do an amazing job. Without them, the schools could not function. But it is wrong for the state to pass a law that would say that a paraprofessional equals a teacher. And that's what you're doing here today. If that's what you want to do, then legislature, propose the bill next session and say, we're going to change what it means to be a teacher or a paraeducator. But to ram it through a system of regulations through the back door, that's not the way New Hampshire should do government. I believe that deserves a full discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. At your seats when you came in, you had 2 packets from me. The first packet is got the date November 21st, 2024 on it. If you could follow along in that packet with me, I'd be real appreciative. That way I can keep my comments brief so that you can all get to lunch.
excuse me, this,
Yeah.
that packet is for the minimum school approval standards?
Madam Chair, the packet that's dated November 21, 2024, and it says to JLCAR members.
Yes?
Yeah, that is my testimony on the second half of the rules based on educator feedback. And then you should have a second packet from me that says Executive Summary 2023 Educator Review Sessions. So you should have two packets from me. If you don't, I've got a couple extras, just let me
Yes.
know. Absolutely.
Yes, I do, we do
Have
have,
somebody else bring it up here.
if I'm not mistaken, it says this is written testimony regarding the minimum school approval rules. We have,
It says feedback relates to the minimum school approval, right?
yes, we have moved on to the minimum academic standards.
Right, and-
Are these rules relative to the minimum academic standards?
Yes, correct. Yep.
In that case, your heading is wrong.
Yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep. So I built this packet based on the 4 objections that exist in RSA 541A 13. And so I'm just going to try to spotlight a few things for you. You've got them. You can read it. I do want to make a quick note, though, that the second packet you have is the full synthesized version of the 17. I know that there were 13 listening sessions. I ran 17 educator review sessions throughout the state. I do want to clarify a point that was made by Chair Klein. I was not tasked. That word implies that somehow I was asked to do this. Was not asked to do this. In fact, I was part of a working group that involved some key players through state organizations, AFT, NEA New Hampshire, New Hampshire School Administrators Association, and members of the National Center for Competency-Based Learning. And I was part of that work group from November of last year, 2023, to January of 2024. And through about a series of 3 meetings of that group with the commissioner, I negotiated, because originally when I proposed this idea, it was met with resistance that we would hold educator review sessions. So I just want to clarify that point for the public record. I was not tasked. I actually negotiated and volunteered to do this. So moving
Thank you for your
on.
service in that case. We
Thank you.
appreciate people who volunteer to do this kind of dirty work.
Yeah, well, I believe it's important to protect the high quality of our public schools here in New Hampshire. So I wanted to do this directly around your process and your 4 objectives. And what I did in this document was present for you some questions and some considerations that you can review and think about, because ultimately it is your job in terms of what you do with these rules moving it forward. The first one is beyond the authority of the agency. And one of the things that I want to point out in the second half of this document is this conversation of pulling out program language that exists in the current rules and linking them to state academic standards. And so one of the things I would ask you to think about is that, and I do want to preference, my testimony is actually based on your JLCAR packets that I pulled exactly from your JLCAR website for the November 21st meeting. So I go to JLCAR now to get the most up-to-date version. And so all my feedback is related to what you have in your packets. If you take the, and part of this does deal with the first section, so just bear with me for a sec here. One of the things that's coming out in the second half of the rules is this notion of taking out programming language and then using a direct point to the state academic standards. And so if you actually, here's one cause that I think you need to ask yourself is, what do we mean by state academic standards? And I will get to, there's a definition in the RSA that comes later. But if you just take the current first half of the document that you just approved and you do a control find in that document, you'll find 21 hits on the phrase academic standards. And that's what's defined in the RSA. But here where it gets a little confusing, you will get hits where it's just the term academic standard and it doesn't clarify, are we talking about state academic standards or are we talking about district academic standards? Because as you just heard through David's presentation before, there is leeway for districts to set their own standards, their own academic standards. You then will get one more, and this is an interesting one because you just approved this in the first half of the rule. You will get a hit that clearly says district's academic standards. And then in the new section that the Department of Ed added with 30626, you'll get the majority of the 13 other hits when you just search for that academic standards that are linked to state academic standard. But that number 2 one where it says district academic standards now opens up this conversation to the question that I give you all to think about, which is, does the State Board of Education have the authority to use the state academic standards to set the criteria for substantive adequate education? And what is stipulated in the RSA and rules regarding the requirement of schools to implement or follow the state academic standards? I'm going to just peruse through my packet here for you very quickly. But on pages 2 and 3, I give you some more examples that get at this gray area about who has the authority on these academic standards and which academic standards are we talking about? General academic standards, district academic standards, or state academic standards. And one of the current rules that you just approved, which is 30604 in policy development number 18, that was in the first half you just approved, actually says that promoting students from one learning level or grade or another based on achievement of competencies in alignment with the district's academic standards. So we have a gray area here about whose academic standards are we pointing to, and is there that if we link these content areas to academic standards, what consistency do we ensure? Because it's not clear in the RSA what the role of academic standards play. If you'll follow along with me and go to page 3 in my packet, what I do think that you start to get clarity of in terms of the RSA is that it's really clear, and I would draw your attention on page 3 to paragraph 5, where it starts with RSA 193E2, that it becomes very clear from the RSA perspective that we're talking about the minimum standards for public school approval, setting the criteria for educational programs. Educational programs. It doesn't say set the criteria for academic standards. It says for educational program. And then on that same page 3, if you go up to the top paragraph, you have all the definitions there laid out, including the new definition that you just approved in the first half on program. So on page 3, you can see all those definitions. Because that RSA is specifically spelling out those definitions, you can't make an assumption that one thing means the same and I can use them like synonyms. They're defined very specifically. And here's what I also draw your attention to that's come up recently in discussion. With the passage of House Bill 1107 and the implementation of the state curriculum frameworks, if you look at the definition of what the state curriculum framework says currently in the RSA that got approved, is that it will say an organized plan of study that serves as a guide and reference to what New Hampshire students should know and be able to do in a learning area and identifies the academic standards aligned to the learning area. Okay, so the question has been, where exactly do the state academic standards live? Because up above, state academic standards are simply means what students should know and be able to do. Here's where you get a little, I think something you're going to need to talk about is we also know in the new RSA that integrated curriculum frameworks into it, that it also says the curriculum frameworks are not meant to be a state curriculum. And that means schools don't have to follow this. So follow I'm a mathematics teacher by trade in my former day, so logic model is something I live by. But if you follow my logic here, that curriculum frameworks include what students know and be able to do. And by the very definition in the RSA, academic standards define what students know and be able to do. Then one could make the connection, our state academic standards live in our curriculum frameworks. But yet our curriculum frameworks would not be mandated to our schools. I want that to set for a minute. Okay? So moving on, I'm going to point you to page 5. I've given you some more pause to think about what the RSA language says and what's being proposed in the rules. And that was to help you with that first objection area of beyond the authority of the agency. But I have a list of conclusions here that I'm just reading through them that I draw as a layperson, a 30-year educator doing this business. And for about 50% of that 30 years, I've been a district level curriculum director. I lead curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development in districts across New Hampshire. Like my counterpart, Marcia, good to see you, Marcia. I also was at the Department of Education during that time with Marcia as the mathematics consultant. But my conclusions are there. And I think one of the couple of things that I want to point out to you in that conclusion is this inconsistency about to play between program, what is a program, academic standards, and curriculum frameworks. And we know in the RSA clearly says that the minimum standards for public school approval set. They define an adequate education for educational programs. A program, an academic standard, and a curriculum framework are not the same thing. And I'm going to tell you that from my experience of over 50% of my career of being a curriculum director. Here's the easiest way that I'm going to try to do it. Academic standards do one thing for us, and that's simply tell us what do we want students to know and be able to do. A program will answer what we call 4 essential questions, and they are, what do we want students to know and be able to do? How are we going to measure, report, and check the progress of our students so that we know they're making the progress they need to meet? Number 3, what do we do for students that go above and beyond our expectations? How do we provide that personalization that you approved in the first half? And the 4th question is, what do we do for our students who may be challenged or may be struggling? That's a program. There's a difference between using rules to outline a program that is set to define an adequate education and then simply changing those rules to academic standards. You lose so much more in the consistency and the high quality public school education that I believe this state wants. So you'll have my conclusions there on page 5. And then I bring you to objection number 2 category. Objection number 2 category is based on the contrary to the intent of the legislature. I think we've talked about this a couple of times already, but I'm not going to belabor it. But there are some very pointed contradictions to state legislation in the areas of personal finance literacy and logic and rhetoric. And I would really encourage you to read them. In both cases, the RSAs are clear that these do not need to be standalone classes that now serve as additional credits for graduation. The RSAs are very clear about making these integrated, applicable topics across other areas as well. And while in public meetings, I have heard the department say, well, we're not going to prevent anybody from that. That's great to say it in public, but if that's going to actually be the practice, then let's get that in the rules and make it clear that, yeah, they could be standalone credits, but they could be integrated and applied. And let's be clear about that. I think the other thing that comes out of play, and this is really on the bottom of 7 and the top of page 8 of my report, is this notion the rules are going to expire. There has been general consensus around the rules, in the 10-year review cycle. If you go to the actual, these are the effect dates that exist in the current rules for the areas that we are talking about, you will see that there are 7 areas that do need immediate attention. I'm not going to disagree with Julie at all on that. And I think there are ways that we can get to them pretty quickly. But then the next set of rules in here aren't due to expire till 2026. So go back to the RSA, and if the RSA 193E tells us that the job of the minimum school approval standards is to maintain the high quality of our public schools, and it's in there, it says that, the phrase high quality is used there, then let's use this time to make sure we have that. I'm going to continue on page 9. You have my proposal that on 3 different occasions. I sent it in March of 2023, I sent it in April of 2024, and then again in July of 2024. My proposal of actually how to do working review sessions with educators and to beef up the rules based on this timeline right here. So that you have that on pages 7 to 11. That's objection number 2 that you could deploy. Objection number 3 is based on determined not in the public interest. We've heard a lot about that today. Given that RSA 541 really doesn't give us much guidance right now, I agree with the representative who said that the current House bill that goes into effect doesn't go into effect till December. So we don't really have too much guidance. We have some guidance on what we define as public interest, right? But one would think that when it comes to public interest, you'd want to have the feedback of your public school educators. So what you're looking here on the page, I'm on page 12, on page 12, what you're looking at are the 5 options that I proposed in my educator review sessions. I had close to now 300 educators if you put all 17 of my sessions together. I had a break. I did some in the fall of 2023 in September, August and September, and then I did another round in March of 2024. Your graph's not in color, but I did send every member of this committee a digital copy of this earlier this week, so you have the color version of it. But so you have the graph. The 84.9% of educators who participated in these review sessions picked option number 5. You can't see the color because it's black and white. And then the 15.1% picked option number 4. 0% of the educators I worked with picked options 1, 2, or 3 in terms of completely pulling rule language about programs out of the minimum standards for public school approval and hoping they would land in state academic standards. Nobody was in favor of that, okay? So here's what I do want to say. I know there was comment earlier today about, you know, the rules that are contained in the content areas and how some of the content areas we don't actually have state academic standards for. And so I wanted to give you samples. So pages 13 through in my report, and these are only samples. I have all the materials from the educators on all the content areas, but if you actually go through pages 13 through 28, those are samples. And what I set up for you in this was, for example, I'm going to just use 13 as my guide to help guide you through these pages, is I took the content area digital literacy. Now, this is an interesting one because we don't have state academic standards for digital literacy. And what I gave you is the educator feedback. And I have to tell you, I had probably 20 to 25 folks throughout the state in my sessions just focus on digital literacy. And they rewrote the rules. One of the things I've heard come back to me is that when I sent things to the Department of Ed, people quickly scanned the rules and said, well, they didn't want to make any changes. That is not true. And I have evidence in my document to show you that. So they rewrote these rules on the brand new 2024 National ISTE standards for citizenship and digital literacy. And so you will see on pages 13 through, I believe it's 15 to the middle of 16, those were the rules those educators came up with. In fact, I will point out to you on page 14, numbers 1 going to 15 to number 7 are the components of those national ISTE standards. They didn't copy them word for word. They synthesized them so they would make sense. And these are educators. So if they're going to make sense to our educators, that's important because then they're going to be the ones that can deliver that education to our students. And then on page 16, you will see what ended up in the proposed rules. Okay? And you can see that all the way through. I would point out that PE, which is PE and health, which are one of the older sets of our current state academic standards, the teachers went through and vamped those up to the also brand new 2024 National SHAPE standards. And you'll see those all the way through page 19. I will point out that I had a huge group from the school psychological services and our state organizations, and they put together their rules that should exist. So following every example of educator, you then have this is what is being proposed in the minimum standards for public school approval. If you go to page 23, please. Those are the ELA rules. And as we know, those are Common Core driven. But I wanted to leave the integrity of the review process in place. So I didn't clean these up. I had told Chairman Klein that I did not feel as a single individual, it was my authority on any authoritative level to go through and then synthesize this educator work and put a best guess forward. That's why in July, once again, I put forward the proposal of how to bring smaller groups of educators together to then come and synthesize a compromise version of the rules that they would recommend. I left this in so that you can see they had crossouts, they had changes, they had additions to it. And then you'll see. If you go to page 25, these were the personal finance literacy rules proposed. And again, this one's interesting. There are no state academic standards for personal finance literacy. So there's a concern right out of the gate. Remember, included in the first half that you just approved is an additional half credit standalone personal finance literacy with no state academic standards to guide what that is going to look like in our schools. I'm going to let that set for a minute. The educators provided it. You can see the proposed rules here. Not a bad match on this one. I will give full credit to that. But a nice step in this process would have been, hey, here's what all the different groups came up with. Let's bring another working group together. Let's meld it. Does this make sense? And then we've got consensus on it, right? On page 27, there is the logic and rhetoric. Again, this is concerning. In what you just approved standalone, half credit in logic and rhetoric, and there are no state academic standards for this area. Now, good news is we had some groups tackle this. It wasn't easy because we had to do a lot of research first around what's out there, what's the nation doing. And there were two versions, and I didn't want to discount. I didn't want to make an authoritative decision on which version was better or not. So I gave you both versions, and then you can see what was proposed in the rules to define logic and rhetoric. So conclusion here on your objection number 3 is determined to be in the public best interest. I think there are enough questions here for you to consider that when you decide your action that you're going to take. The last objection area is deemed by the committee to have a substantial economic impact. I just pulled out this one area. There were a few other areas, but I wanted to keep this as manageable as I could. And I did the quickest comparison was the changes specifically in the social studies area in the credits for graduation. And keep in mind, you just approved those changes in the first half of the document. So you have approved now a change in how social studies courses were 2.5 credits for graduation are now 5 credits. You've doubled that. That has to have an impact on staffing and scheduling at any high school with no cost implications behind it. So I'm here for questions. Thank you again for your time and for me willing to present that information.
Thank you. Sean Parr.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair, for taking my comments there. My name is Sean Parr. I am the representative from Manchester's Board of School Committee, and I do speak on behalf of our school board today. I am the chair of the Education Legislation Committee, and I have followed this process for almost 2 years now. I have been, I should also say I am an educator as well. I'm a professor at St. Anselm College, so I am quite aware of the stakes of these changes to the rules. I'll try not to repeat things, but I think it is important to go on the record that even just today there were 2 falsehoods that were stated multiple times that should be corrected. One is that the Department of Education website does not have the most current versions of these rules on its website there. That is not possible for someone from the public to access on the website. So that is false. Two, there were many claims made about the class size issue, and that the wording in the revised version is the same as the wording in the current version, and that's also false. The header of the new section talks about student educator ratios, and the original stated class size maximums, and the class size is very different from student educator ratios. Our district has been very careful in defining these things very specifically in our own policies. We feel it's very important. The research shows very clearly that class size is much more important than student educator ratios, that actually having a room with 20 students in it and one teacher is far better than having a room with 40 students in it and 2 teachers or a teacher and a para. That research is substantial and clear. And so we have striven to continue that emphasis on class size rather than student educator ratios. And if you look at the language of the rules that you just approved, it is substantially different from the current language. And I think it's really important that that go on the record, because that is something that was discussed several times and several people made false claims about that. With regard to the second half of the rules, we would echo the comments from David Trumbull that these subject area requirements have indeed been watered down. Marcia McCaffrey also pointed out many salient points about the arts and how these frameworks are not mandated, but suggested frameworks for schools to follow. And I think it's important that we understand that that means that districts can make choices to opt out of offering many of these things, to opt out of programming a real systematic framework or a systematic program of study for our students in public schools. I would also point out that our board has been particularly active, and we have been quite grateful. We've been lucky enough to have a visit from Commissioner Edelblut himself. He came to one of our school board meetings. We have held our own forums where Fred Bramante came and spoke with us there. We've been very active in asking questions, involving the public as much as we could. We have given our feedback several times to the State Board of Education, both in person and in writing. All of our letters have been unanimously approved by our board. We have a robust, strong board with lots of different opinions. I think I can say safely that it's a bipartisan board, and for all of us to unanimously approve these letters of concern about the rules changes speaks very strongly to a coming together of understanding the stakes of these minimum standards and the changes that are being made. As for making sure that we're talking about the current versions there, I can state very specifically that several of our concerns remain. In addition to the class size maximum concern, we also have been very concerned about the vague language changes, especially the learning opportunities, the phrase learning opportunities and the phrase learning levels. And we feel very strongly that these changes are too vaguely defined and water down the minimum standards for education here. We have argued from the beginning, from March of 2023, that it's been important for direct instruction to be fundamental to minimum education standards, and that ideas of learning opportunities and learning levels do not cover that requirement of instruction. I would say 2 things with regard to your committee, JLCAR. I know that you have very specific rules about when you can object there. And I think from our perspective as a board, public interest and fiscal impact are the 2 concerns that we still have that your committee has the power to raise objections to. Public interest has not been addressed. The feedback has been ignored. We have called attention to this many times over the last 2 years. We feel that many educators, stakeholders, and our entire school district has been disregarded with regard to our concerns. We have been very consistent in our feedback. In a way, this erodes trust, right? I mean, public interest is not just, well, we have concerns and you're not listening to them. Public interest is also, we need to trust that the State Department of Education cares about the feedback of educators and school districts. We need to trust that when they say something is available to the public, that it's available to the public. we need to trust that when they say learning opportunities are the same as direct instruction, well, we need definitions that really show that and prove that, right? So trust has really been eroded in this case. And there's a reason why there are so many of us who are upset that we couldn't speak before the first part of this hearing. There are so many of us that are objecting the work that Christine Downing has done to involve hundreds of educators on her own, not at the behest of the Department of Education. That shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be necessary. The Department of Education should be doing that work. They should be adhering to that sense of outreach and trying to find ways to bring educators to the table so that these rules really do reflect the best interests of our students here in New Hampshire. Finally, fiscal impact. This was touched upon by Christine Downing and others. I think that what has been maybe a little bit less mentioned is that the vagueness in terms of district versus state academic standards, that the definition of adequacy funding is very much linked to these minimum standards and what is required there. So if class size is changed because it's not a maximum but a student-teacher ratio, if academic standards are inconsistently referred to via district or state versus district or state standards, and if we have a sense that these subject area program requirements are now just frameworks that may be applicable, then that is affecting what the minimum standards do affect what an adequate education should be funded, how it should be funded there. And so I think it's really important that there be a deeper look at what the fiscal impact is of these rule changes. These are large-scale changes. They have a fiscal impact. They open the path for serious cuts to public education funding. And I think it's really important that this committee speaks out about this. We're just a hop, skip, and a jump from Arizona, who's done things like this, incorporated universal vouchers, and now has like a $1 billion deficit. I mean, this is the direction with these rules. This is very fiscally irresponsible to pass these rules without investigating the consequences of the changes there. So I feel very strongly about this. Our board has discussed this many times, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Rhoda.
Yes, so is your testimony in line with the letter that we have from you?
It is, yes. I think there was one of our letters was included in your packet there. That was from September, I believe.
Bar being stenoed here, you know.
I am being what?
You're being
recorded.
Yes.
Not
thank you.
recorded. She is a court reporter.
Thank you, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you.
Gianna Gelsey.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gianna Jelsey. I'm a parent of two in the Oyster River Cooperative School District, and I'm also here as a representative of the Oyster River District School Board. A lot of the things I was going to speak about have already been touched on, so I don't necessarily want to repeat them. The previous gentleman before me actually said many of them, but considering what JLCAR is actually limited to, the two things that I really want to talk about again is the public interest and also fiscal impact. First of all, there's a huge problem with actually the clarity of this. I was actually spending time when we were discussing the first half of these rules, about verifying that these information was readily available on the Department of Education website, and it simply isn't and hasn't been. The most recent rules aren't there. It's true I can find them under JLCAR, but that's not under the Department of Education. I only see if it pops up in your guys' packets. So that's one thing there. Public interest has to be served by the ability to read and understand it. Secondly, I want to address something that was in the first half of the rules regarding the availability of the information regarding public hearing sessions on this. I went to the first public hearing session led by Bermonti like 2 years ago that was actually hosted at the Oyster River High School. And there was no information provided about these regulations whatsoever. They weren't there. He just talked a lot about how awesome he was in competency-based education for 2 hours. It was not an informative session. So that did not address what was happening here because public interest was not served. I actually went at the end of that meeting and actually asked him, what if you guys considered the fiscal impact of the changes in these regulations? And he told me no. So right from the get-go, these things were not considering the fiscal impact. And as a school board member, the fiscal impact is incredibly important. So I don't want to reiterate some of the things people were saying, but also, again, it's the adequacy funding and the link to it, to me, is pivotally important. No, the class size maximum and class size ratios are not the same. Right now in our school district, we are having an issue with the fact that our kindergarten population exploded, and we're actually having to figure out how we're going to actually add classrooms onto the current elementary schools we have. And a lot of that is absolutely linked to the fact that we have limits on how many kids fit in the classroom. That's not just fire code, it's actually talking about how well a kid is actually educated. And so we're having to figure out how we're going to pay for that to make sure that we fit these standards. It's in our policy, and we are actually quite understanding that there's a difference between having an educator in the classroom who is a teacher and an educator who is a paraprofessional. So there's that there. Another concern we have that I'll reiterate from other folks, again, is that the learning opportunities, learning levels versus direct instruction is pivotally important. It's definitely a watering down. One of the things that I actually have a concern about is that that language makes it essentially that a school district becomes a credentialing center rather than a teaching center. And the difference of that is that with these learning opportunities, including the Learning Everywhere program, is that it makes it so a school district is responsible for an outside agency's teaching, even though the school district had nothing to do with it. They're providing something, but we're the ones who are supposed to be evaluating it and assessing it. And a lot of that language of like how you do assessments and what's considered under that has actually been removed under the second half of the rules. It's not there. And so we're responsible for something, but actually have no ownership and control over it. So again, I want to point out learning opportunities, learning levels is not equivalent to direct instruction, and that goes again to the ensure then provide language that again is problematic. One of the things that I find concerning is that, I think someone mentioned this earlier, is that competencies have not been very clearly defined by anybody. Everybody's working very hard on trying to figure out what those mean and how you're going to teach it. And there's a huge amount that actually our district right now is working on professional development and how to make it so our assessments actually assess competencies. It is extremely difficult work. And when you make it so the standards are removed in these rules and it just becomes competencies, you're putting actually a tremendous burden onto each individual district and each individual teacher and administrator, et cetera, to try and figure out what it's going to mean. By removing guidance, you've actually put a tremendous burden, particularly financially, onto the districts. As I said, we actually just hired people. We hired a consultancy firm to try and actually deal with this issue because we're not getting the guidance from somewhere. Every district is having to reinvent the wheel here, which means that is an incredible fiscal impact that's ongoing. And I guess the last thing to go through is, again, is like the question of like who has the authority on academic standards, I think is something that really needs to be looked at. Ms. Downing really addressed that. That's basically a summary of that. I can answer any questions if I'm able.
Thank you. Sir, if you'd like to come up, I don't have your name yet, but I noticed you wanted to speak. Sean Peschel?
Sean Peschel. Just representing myself. I am a resident of New Hampshire and also an educator here in New Hampshire too. Just want to call your attention to, from what I understand, a procedural disconnect. At an earlier meeting that the part one of the 306s were discussed and public hearing and public comment was made, there was a request to hold off on voting on that part. In essence, understanding, because there was known and made understood that part one and part two should be heard and listened together before making a vote on part one. That's where the disconnect comes then here today. You did not hear new testimony on part one, which is totally fine, your prerogative, because you've heard stuff before, you heard some procedural stuff from two representatives, but you did take a vote on part one without hearing about part two, which is why, it was, again, to reiterate why you held off on voting for part one last meeting in order to vote on part two today. Now hearing the testimony for part two, mostly from Christine Dowling, she highlighted for you very clearly the connections, multiple connections between part one and part two. With this stated, I ask for a vote of reconsideration, that you be brought forward by a prevailing member of the prevailing side, meaning a person that voted to approve Part 1. And I ask that you reconsider Part 1, now hearing about Part 2, and vote on both Parts 1 and 2 today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am? If you have new testimony, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Mary Wilkie. I'm a resident of Concord, and I am a retired public school teacher. And I have two concerns with the proposed rules. The first is that they exceed the department's regulatory authority and should be rejected. These proposed changes to the rules represent monumental changes in the way public education would be provided and go well beyond the statutory authority of the Department of Education. The changes reflect an entirely different vision of public education than what we've had to date. A vision in which school districts don't have to provide education, they just have to ensure it. And where instruction may or may not be offered, and where class sizes may be determined by the number of people in the room that don't necessarily all meet the definition of teachers. You could even interpret that section as allowing the ratio to depend on the number of qualified teachers and paraprofessionals in the whole building compared to the number of students in the whole building. The proposed rules consistently delete words like program and instruction, indicating that schools will no longer be required to provide systematic and planned instruction via lessons conducted by certified teachers, as they have been doing for generations. The fact that the changes in the proposed rules are so dramatic has been reflected in the outpouring of testimony against them. More than 200 people, as you know, have submitted testimony critical of these changes, with many worried about significant diminishment of the quality of education and of our public schools. It is true that after the public testimony in April, the board made some changes in the proposed rules, but if you look very carefully at the wording of those changes, you'll see that in the end, the rules still would remove current requirements that schools provide systematic and planned instruction offered by licensed teachers in classes with reasonable size limits. When RSA 193E was adopted to set forth the content of an adequate education, legislators didn't have in mind a public education system that would allow for a smorgasbord of optional experiences that might or might not involve teachers, might or might not involve classrooms or instruction. In fact, after setting out a list of the learning areas in 193E, for instance, language arts and math, etc., the legislature specifically required that teachers use academic and applied instruction to teach the learning areas. The rule's deletion of words like instruction and courses and teaching and program is a policy move inconsistent with that language and with the intent of the legislature. In short, the drafters of these proposed rules are imagining school in a very different way from what currently exists, from what is expected by the taxpayers who pay for them and the parents who send their children to them, and from the legislature itself. Certainly there's room in the public discourse to imagine various aspects or reimagine various aspects of public education, and I'm not arguing in favor of maintaining the status quo for the end of time, but for an administrative agency to institute dramatic policy changes of this kind through rulemaking is a significant overreach of its authority and violates the constitutional principle of separation of powers. I also am concerned that the rules are not in the public interest, and others have mentioned this. I won't duplicate what they've said. I have a couple of different aspects I want to mention. The New Hampshire Supreme Court has written, public education differs from all other services of the state. No other governmental service plays such a seminal role in developing and maintaining a citizenry capable of furthering the economic, political, and social viability of the state. Only in Part 2, Article 83, is it declared a duty of the legislature to cherish a service mandated by the state constitution. Given their acknowledged importance to our democracy, our communities, and our students, weakening public schools by watering down the minimum standards is just, by simple logic, against public interest. Common sense also suggests that if the proposals were in the public interest, the public would want them. And yet, I have yet to hear a single person today, last time, and at the hearing in April at the board ever urge the department to adopt these rules. Moreover, somebody else has already mentioned the issue of equity and the idea that the proposed rules make so many aspects of education vague or non-mandatory that we can easily foresee schools in some districts making choices that wouldn't meet our current standards simply because they're less expensive. I would just like to add to that we already have a school system that is funded in a way that creates haves and have-nots depending on zip code. Lowering the mandatory standards, which state what is expected at the very least in every public school, will make these disparities worse, which is, of course, not in the public interest. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you for your testimony. Chairman Klein, do you wish to say anything?
I'm going to defer to the department attorney who can, I think.
Okay, thank you. We have someone else.
He may change his mind here shortly. The skill that I think I might have tried to renew was high school debate, trying to listen to everyone's comments and try to make sure that I can address everything. I'm sure I'm not going to address every point that was made holistically here. I'm going to start with the same premise that I started my last remarks, which is I'm going to take you all back to why we're here and who your counsel is and who's made recommendations to you. And there have been, go back through the history, the initial proposal was brought forward. There were lots of changes, recommendations for changes, comments from OLS regarding that initial proposal that was initially passed by the state board. The state board reviewed those comments with that from OLS, reviewed public comment, made made policy decisions based upon that public comment that was received. The state board is not legally compelled to adopt all public comment. Considering the fact some of it is contradictory, it would actually be impossible to adopt all pieces of public comment and put forth a amended proposal. That's exactly what the process is. OLS has reviewed that at this point and has no objection and virtually no comment. Again, a couple typos. So that should be the first thing you all look to when you're making a determination is what did your council say about these rules and whether they should be approved? Overwhelmingly, your council's telling you they should be approved. There were many, many policy-related arguments that were brought up during the hearing process in the last hour plus. Many of them did not relate to the second half at all. Many of them related back to the first half. There was, and I think I have to address this for the sake of my rules administrator who has been accused of lying and misrepresenting the facts, and I think I was too, that one of our links on our website wasn't working. So we learned today one of the links wasn't working. At no point in time, it was working when we put it up. Our requirement is to comply with 541A, which is to make sure that the public has notice, and that is that the information is on the JLCAR website. That is our legal requirement. Number one, we have satisfied our legal requirement. There's been no question that we've satisfied our legal requirement. Our ethics have all been challenged because there was a link that wasn't working on our website. The more important part of that is no one bothered to point it out. Apparently everybody behind me decided that the website wasn't working, but didn't bother to call Ms. Shea or me, who is
Madam
in charge
Chair,
of
objection. Okay, we are attributing motivation to people who are providing testimony. I think it's wildly inappropriate.
Yes, you cannot concern yourself with their motivation. You must simply deal with what they did or said.
Thank you. I am in charge of right to knows as department counsel. I have had no right to knows for any proposals that are in front of this board today. The department, I am also receive all inquiries that come into the DOE info that my staff doesn't know, and this would have been something that would have come to me or Ms. Shea. I have not received any inquiries that there was any broken information or not available information. But most importantly, we've complied with the law, and that's 541A, and that was our obligation. The department had attempted, and unfortunately sounds like unsuccessfully, to provide an extra layer of information, and that does not make it illegal. So one of the last comments that was made was that the rules in front of you are beyond the scope of the Department of Education. Well, the Department of Education does not have rulemaking authority. These rules are the state board rules. That's always very important to notice. The Department of Education is a unique agency in that our agency does not have, our commissioner does not have the authority to promulgate rules. Our rulemaking authority is the state board. That does make us unique. There's been a lot of discussion by several speakers that we're somehow not going to have instruction. And I hate to go back to the first half, but I think I have to go back to the first half rules in order to point to the places where the rules actually require instruction, which is the content areas then are tied to the back half. 30618A says all students have access to full year, full day instruction in person as required in RSA 189.1 and RSA 189.24. That's full day, full-time instruction. The other piece of this goes back to school year, which is under 30615. Each school shall maintain a calendar, provides 180 days of instruction or the required number of instructional hours, which may result in fewer than 180 days. So it's very clear. And then in B, it breaks down to the number of instructional time for kindergarten, elementary schools, and for grades 7 to 12. And if that's tied to the other rule that requires in-person instruction. There was a concern expressed by one of the speakers relating to the academic standards, setting forth kind of where we want kids at certain benchmarks, 4th and 8th and 12th grade. I would say look no further than to the legislative language in 193E2A Roman numeral 2, which sets forth that the standards shall cover kindergarten through 12th grade and clearly put forth the opportunities to acquire communication, analytical, research skills, substantive knowledge expected to be possessed by students at various grade levels, including the credit requirement necessary to earn a high school diploma. So the legislature has said the academic standards are supposed to be pegged to certain grade levels, which is what we've done. The legislature hasn't said that the academic standards have to provide a criteria for attainment for each grade through K through 12. There was a statement that the academic standards were optional and that we don't have programs. I think if you look carefully at the back half, if you go through each content area, they each start with the same language, that the local school board shall ensure a developmentally appropriate and fill in the blank for what the content areas program for each school consistent with the local competencies. Again, you have to go back and look at the definition of program in the rules. So you go back to 306.022. Which defines program as a grouping of interrelated activities, opportunities, and resources designed to implement a particular goal. There's no question that there's program, education, instructional time, and that's been done. And I think we've beat the dead horse in front of that. There has to be a credentialed educator, a credential that is granted by the State Board of Education. instructing the students under these rules. I am sure I've missed something. A couple of things regarding, I think the concern about digital literacy. If you go look to the front half, again, unfortunately, the graduation requirements currently require half a credit of digital literacy. They have, for the last 10 plus years, they've already, this is the complaint is actually about something that's been in current law the entire time. And if there's any concern about lack of academic standards for rhetoric at this point, those rules don't go into effect for kids until they enter school 2 years from now. So, I mean, it's going to take some time to get those academic standards done, but I'm hopeful that the department will and the state board will be able to approve those in line with the time frame set forth in those rules. But if you look at these, we're really making very minimal changes, and it's unfortunate that it seems like we can't read through the rules in the front half to allow our education of how the back half is supposed to work, and you're getting a little bit blind. I'm happy to answer any questions in case I missed somebody's point from earlier that you all need to have discussed.
I have one question. In Ms. Downing's report, there is a page that shows an increase in credits required for graduation in the area of social studies. Is that due to the rule, or is it due to additions in the statute?
There were changes in the statute that required additional graduation requirements in the area of civics. Thank you.
Yeah. Representative Hacken Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Has the State Board of Education met since the last Legislative Oversight Committee meeting and vote on October 29th?
Yes, there was a meeting of the state board last Thursday.
And did they take up the revised rules vote again?
Hi, sorry, Julie Shea. They do not have to vote on those yet because the department makes the amended conditional approval request. They will be looking at that at the December meeting and creating a response and then sending it to the JLCAR.
In the way your rules work, our conditional approval was due on October 30, not 31st. I think it was October 1st.
November.
So they were due a couple of weeks before the state board had a meeting. So in order for us to be at this meeting, we had to get everything together before the state board meeting.
Director
I'll let
Morrell.
Attorney Muniz explain that.
Director Morrell, if you could explain that, please.
If I can clarify, conditional approvals are a two-stage process. Because the rulemaker is rarely here to request that conditional approval, it's made by their staff. That means the conditional approval goes back to the agency, has to be, the language that was offered by their staff is reviewed and given approval by commission or board or department head. And then it comes back to our office.
Okay, so
And yes, their conditional approval deadline was after the deadline for this JLCAR meeting. So they had to get it in before the deadline for the JLCAR meeting, so it would be on this meeting.
okay. Representative Garota.
Yes, I would like to, could you point out the financial note on the second half? What page is that on?
I believe it's on page 7 of your final proposal packet. It's within the original notice that was filed with our office with the initial proposal. So the fiscal impact statement comes from the legislative budget assistant, and we include the notice in all of our final proposal packets. And it starts on page 4 of the FP packet for 2024-42. And you can see number 10 says fiscal impact statement, and it has the fiscal impact number and then the fiscal impact from the LBA. And keep in mind that this analysis for the LBA is between the proposed rule to the existing rule.
Right. Senator Gray?
I'm looking for, and I have a question, another question. I'd like to know what legislation was passed that requires civics. Because I don't have a recollection of that.
It was a couple of years ago.
And I can't find that fiscal note on page 7. I'm sorry.
It says
Page
no
4.
impact.
Microphone is off.
$189.11, instruction in national and state history and government and civics.
That's not the JLCAR, that's the fiscal note. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
There's a list in 1A requiring dedicated class time for civics in elementary, half-year course of the equivalent in civics in middle school, half-year course in civics in high school, and a one-year course in history, government, and constitutions in of United States and New Hampshire in high school, required for high school graduation.
And that effective date?
Yes. Yes, Representative Leon?
September 10th, 2024. That is for the most recent change in that statute.
But I'm not sure it pertains to that.
Yeah,
clause.
if I may, I think there might be some confusion here. I might be able to help. So if you look at that high school graduation requirements, the list, there's 20 credits is what we had before, and we remain with 20 credits. We made some changes, but you'll notice that at the top, we changed the language from required course of study and credits to required credits for high school graduation. So you still have 20 credits, just like you did before, but we rearranged the credits. So I don't have all the history of the changes here, so I don't know that I could get you every single thing that we changed.
And there were some changes that were made at state board meetings based upon your working group as well. And this is where
correct.
yeah.
So we proposed some changes, and then we got feedback on them and altered them. We were going to reduce the number of open electives further than we actually ended up doing. And that was on feedback from CTE instructors. But we added, so for example, we changed the mathematics credits to add a half credit in statistics and data analysis, right? And reduce it from 4 required credits to 3 or 3.5. Did we add 3.5? Anyway. We made an adjustment to the history, the way the history credits are required. And logic and rhetoric. But it's important to note that those are credits. And to get to one of the points that was made before, this is not a requirement to offer a standalone logic and rhetoric class. This is consistent with the statutory authority to require, because the statute requires that the kids get credits in logic and rhetoric. We put that into the high school requirements, not for a standalone course, but for credits, just to reemphasize that legislative requirement. So I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Madam Chair, Dr. Downing, I think, has a perspective on that I'd like to hear. Thank you. Because I'm not clear.
Yes.
It's very
Madam
unclear.
Chair,
Yes, thank
before we go to another person in the audience, you did recognize me and one of the representatives had a follow-on question, so I would like to be recognized.
Thank you. We're trying to answer this question, but Senator Gray, please.
I
speak.
move to approve. I have not heard
Second.
anything in this testimony that has changed my opinion from what I had when I walked into the room, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. We have a motion on the floor. If someone, it has been seconded by
I sec-
Representative Lynn. Is there someone who can answer the question about these credits to our, yes, thank you, Ms. Downing, that would help.
If you actually go to my report, page 29, you'll see a direct comparison.
Look it again.
I am going to have to respectfully disagree with Attorney Brown over here that the credit requirements were a result of changes in the legislation. And if you look at my chart on page 29, I'll carefully explain that to you. So US and New Hampshire history has always been offered in our high schools as one credit. What the board did was separate that now out specifically to be US history as a half credit, separate New Hampshire history as a half credit. That was a net change of 0. United States and New Hampshire government and civics has always been offered. There is nothing in the RSA in 193E that changed to cause these credit requirement changes. So they decided to separate out civics, but I want to point out that in paragraph 1 of 193E2A, which defines the areas for an adequate education, civics has always been listed next to social studies in the parentheses. Civics has been and continues to be happening in our high schools. And then they separated out the history, government, and constitution of US and New Hampshire to one credit. Again, I'm going to tell you from a high school perspective, in our US and New Hampshire government classes, the study of the Constitution has always been there. There has not been a legislative, an RSA change to need that. In economics, and this is where I'm going to counteract the argument from Chair Klein, where he continues to say, well, they can do it integrated, because I brought this up at the State Board of Ed. Economics has always been a graduation requirement. And when the first bill passed that required the direct instruction of personal finance literacy, that bill said it may be integrated. So therefore, many high schools integrated personal finance literacy into economics. But you can see what the board has now done is made personal finance literacy its own separate half credit now. That sends a signal to the field that they can no longer be integrated because prior we could. The world history, global studies, or geography has always been there. That is not a legislative change, but yet they have now upped it to a full credit with no clarity to the field about why are we increasing this to a full credit if we've already got it in there. And then logic and rhetoric for years, well, I wouldn't say years, last few years, logic and rhetoric has been part of Part B of 193E2A, and the RSA clearly says there that it will be integrated in the above academic areas of paragraph 1, but yet now we've imposed a half credit. I have to refute the public claim that was made here today that these credit changes were due to RSA changes. That is not correct. And I do want to speak.
Question, Ms. Downing.
Yep.
Not an accusation. The question was, is that due to legislative changes?
No, it's not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would like to speak to the motion.
Please.
I'll let the person who made the motion speak to his motion.
Senator Gray, you spoke to the motion? Do you wish to continue?
Pretty much I've said all I want, except
Okay.
that I believe that the process has been followed and tried to be followed correctly, and that I am ready to vote on this issue.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to
Senator
speak-
Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, what's at stake here which has been made very clear, is that we're talking about the quality of our public education in New Hampshire. And that's what's at stake here. I'm a mom, I have a 5th grader. I have a deep, deep interest in making sure that my son's education is as high quality as possible, of course, for every child in my district and the state. That's what's at stake here. The quality of our public education should not be a partisan issue. It shouldn't, which is why it was pretty unfortunate that first vote was a partisan vote, because it shouldn't be. The quality of our public education has nothing to do with politics. It is the foundation of our democracy. It's a constitutional requirement in the state of New Hampshire. There has been countless litigation defining what is a adequate education. That's what's at stake here. This should not be about politics. Yet we seem to be going in a direction where we are ignoring the vast majority of our educators, our administrators, our parents, all whom have major, major concerns with these rules. And I deeply respect our attorneys that serve the JLCAR. I deeply respect them. And also, it is our obligation as elected officials to determine and make an analysis about the public interest. And that's what we were doing here. So I want to clearly state for the record that based on the volume of testimony we have received both today and over the course of almost many years now, that there are 4 bases for an objection. And those are more bases than I have ever seen as a member of JLCAR, as both a member for the past 4 years, an attorney who used to practice in front of JLCAR. I have never seen such a substantial, solid basis for objection of any rules. I haven't, and there are 4. I'm specifically referencing our JLCAR rules. 1, these rules should be objected to. We should all be voting against this approval because these rules clearly go beyond agency authority. That's under Part 401. Another basis for objection, Part 402. These rules are clearly contrary to legislative intent. That's Part 402. Part 403, these rules are clearly contrary to the public interest. And in my opinion, this is the strongest basis for an objection. And then Part 404, there is a substantial impact, fiscal impact on these rules. It's undeniable, and it has not been recognized in the fiscal impact statement. We have not fully explored this. I feel like this is a dereliction of our duty to our constituents without sufficiently exploring this. So based on that, I will be voting against the approval. And I really encourage all of us to take a step back, to take a beat, to not make this a political vote, send a message to the state and to our constituents that public education is not a political issue, to take a step back and listen to our educators, listen to our parents, listen to our administrators, and vote against this approval and move towards an objection so we can get this right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments, Representative Hacken Phillips?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, I agree with Senator Whitley's remarks. I just wanted to make 2 notes in addition to that. There was a passing thought earlier today in testimony that the public and the legislature would need to submit a right to know request in order to get timely and accurate information about the rulemaking process that we are reviewing today. And the absence of that was suggested as that there wasn't really a need for it. So I would just like to checkmark that as being concerning, that the legislature or the public would need to file an official right to know request in order to receive the information in a timely basis that we're reviewing today. Second is that there's this insistence that there's no confusion because of, the new front half of the rules that we just approved clearly connect and explain the back half of the rules. And, you can find the clarification in the front half by looking at the back half and vice versa. And I think that's just a very spurious position given the testimony we've heard over and over again, that it's not clear, that there are vague terms and that the rules, the front half and back half, are not clearly defined and do not give districts clear marching orders. So I think, again, this is concerning. I'd just like to pause and go back to the RSA 139 E2A concerns. It seems to me that the state board shall not, according to RSA 193 E2A, Roman numeral 4C, the state board shall not recommend any existing academic standards and shall not approve any new academic standards without prior review and recommendation of the Legislative Oversight Committee established in RSA 193 CA2. And that did go into effect August of 2023. So while I do thank the commissioner, the director, for providing the explanation of how conditional approvals work, I think the procedural safeguards in law under this clause require specific processes in sequential order to be undertaken for due process and fair notice through our public meetings to be upheld. So what we see from the timeline leading up to today is that the department has failed to, first, participate in meaningful public hearings, second, provide evidence of incorporating the committee's feedback when there were closed-door meetings by some members of the committee, but not all, and there being no public meeting or an opportunity for the other members of the Legislative Oversight Committee to ask their questions of the department. Three, there was no provision of appropriate materials or documents for review by the members of the committee or the public during those public meetings by the committee. And four, I'd just like to clarify there's general confusion over what the actual language of the proposed rules or changes to the rules for that definition of educator were under consideration at the time of the committee's vote. So that committee did review and recommend this very vague statement for their conditional approval. But again, that was out of order and in defiance of legislative intent. There remains important questions whether the state board has subsequently approved the committee's final recommendation, and from what I understand, they have not. And further question is whether the committee's final recommendation can be valued when the proposed rules were never put into writing before the committee's final recommendation vote. For the final question is whether the Department of Education's rulemaking process for the proposed 306 rules effectively bypassed the meaningful participation of the Legislative Oversight Committee and furthermore their feedback. So on that basis alone, Madam Chair, I cannot vote affirmatively. I'm not voting today, but if I were voting, I wouldn't be able to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Chair, I request a roll call.
Certainly, that makes sense. Representative Baroda?
Yes, these are the things that are concerning to me, in that there's no fiscal impact to these rules. Yet I don't know how that analysis was done. And it's something that I'm going to dig further into, because to me, when we have a school board member saying that there is going to be a fiscal impact, that seems odd to me. Because I would think that a school district, now maybe they are out of the calculation of a fiscal note, but that's important. And the school districts are going to get an impact. That's a downshifting of cost to the districts. And I don't know if that's going to happen, and I think it's important to know that, which is why I'm going to be voting against this motion. Furthermore, I think that if this occurs, it is an erosion of trust, because the citizens of New Hampshire trust us to do what's best for them, and I do not think we're doing that today.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
There was a discussion of partisanship in this thing. We've got the Board of Education, nonpartisan. We've got our own staff that is nonpartisan. I don't understand why someone would think that our vote is based on input from people who are partisan, because we've taken the input from the Board of Education. We've taken the input from the Department of Education. We've taken the input from the staff. My vote was not partisan. It was based on those recommendations of the people that we entrust with that obligation. Thank you.
Director Osterhaus.
I know I'm a little bit new to the scene, and some people here know me, some people don't. I just want to point something out. I think some very nice things have been said about OLS staff and OLS attorneys today by the senators on both sides of the aisle. One thing I do want to make clear, and this was brought up at the beginning of the meeting, is that OLS staff received Ms. Downing's written testimony this morning, and we have not done a comprehensive legal analysis of it. So we have reviewed everything that came prior to this, but we have not looked at this, and I just want to make sure that the committee is aware of that before they make any decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Muniz?
Also on regarding the fiscal impact statements, that is the purview of the LBA. Should the intent of the legislature to be to beef up those fiscal impact statements or make them different or make the review different, our office would be happy to work with the LBA because those fiscal impact statements do come to us and we do review them and we do sometimes send them back to the LBA for corrections. But that process is the LBA process. We are happy to help with that.
Yes. Yes.
By no means did my comment have any reflection on your office. It is, I just want to understand it for myself, and I will go speak with them directly. And if something should come up, I will be glad to let you know.
Yes. And I will mention that I'm confused why people are worried about the fiscal impact when the same people were testifying that these rules would weaken the requirements, which I don't understand why they wouldn't decrease the cost. So, which most people are much less worried about than cost increases. All right, thank you. Representative Schmidt, you wish to say something?
I wish to say that the point needs to be understood by everybody listening, and that is who is going to pay the costs. Constitution states and was pointed out as a basis of the Claremont decision. The interpretation was that the word cherish meant fiscal responsibility of the state to provide an adequate education. But to the degree that these rules possibly will push costs off onto property taxpayers, that ain't the state.
Thank you, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you. So I will be voting no as well.
All right. The motion is to accept the rules. Representative Grote?
No.
Representative Leon?
Yes.
Representative Lynn?
Yes.
Representative Schmidt?
No.
Senator Gray for Senator Lang?
Yes.
Senator Chandley?
No.
Representative Doucette for
Yeah.
Senator Innes? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Ward?
Yes.
Senator Whitley?
No.
And I will vote yes. And the rule is approved 6-4. Thank you all for coming. Director Morrow?
Thank you. I'd like to make one statement for the benefit of the public. When Attorney Brown was testifying, she indicated the lack of comments, substantive comments by our staff, which is absolutely true. But she equated that with staff suggesting approval to the committee. That is certainly not the case. It's not our job to indicate whether a rule should be objected to or approved.
Thank
Thank you, Director,
Thank
for
you.
that clarification.
All right. The Board of Dental Examiners, Representative Schmidt has moved to postpone. Second by Representative Leon. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Lovely. Fertilizers.
Yes, 2024, 143 fertilizers, agriculture 1,100. There are a ton of editorial comments, but I won't spend any time on those. All of those can be addressed at adoption. The main reason why this proposal is not on the consent agenda is because the interim rules just expired on October 27th. And there are two fees that are included in the rule. There is one fee that is set by the rule itself. There is another fee that is set in statute. So the one that's set in statute is in RSA 431.4, and that's the $75 registration fee. But the other fee is set by the rule, and you'll see that on page 13 of your packet, and that's in Agriculture 1106. That fee is an inspection fee of 20 cents a ton with a minimum of $5. And like I said, the rules expired, the interim rules just expired on October 27th. So you may have some questions for the agency of whether or not they've collected that fee that's set in the rule and not in the statute.
And we do. No, push it so the red light comes on.
Red light, okay. Patricia Benner, Legislative Coordinator for the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food.
Would you please speak into the microphones?
Sure, I'm sorry.
Close. You have to
Close.
speak into it, not at.
Sorry, I was hearing a lot of reverberation before, so I was
He's got a lot.
trying to spare everyone's ears. Patricia Benner, is Legislative Coordinator for the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food. And I would assume that to answer that question, there has been a lapse. The original rule that expired on 10/27 was an interim rule, and so therefore, because even though it was in the process, they expired. So we're, there's a couple of weeks lag. Unfortunately, there was an early payment of $15 that was went through. However, that was the only one that
In the last month.
yes.
Oh, good thing. Anyone have any comments, questions, motions? Senator Gray moves to approve. Is there a second? Second by Senator Ward. Any discussion? All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'm glad you approved it within reasonable time frame. All right. HHS has two interim rules.
Yes, interim rule 11 and 12. The first has to do with the distribution and disbursement of support payments, which is HEW 403.01. The reason this is on the regular agenda is because this interim rule was filed pursuant to RSA 541A19 1E, which is to minimize the time between the expiration and subsequent readoption of the rule by the agency. So this rule has been expired since September 26th of this year. So there may be a question about how the agency has been enforcing the distribution and disbursement of support payments without rules. There are some federal regulations regarding this topic. However, the rules are much more specific than the federal regulations, so it's hard to rely solely on those federal regulations.
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon. Allison Radmay, the Administrator for the Rules Unit at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Dekatowski, and I am the Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Child Support Services with the Department of Health and Human Services Division of Economic Stability.
And what have you done for the last 2 months while your rules were expired?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Our agency has continued to distribute and disperse child support payments that we have received over these last period of time that the rule has expired, naturally, our program has a duty to the families that we are serving to ensure that not only are the payments that we are collecting on behalf of parents who are ordered by the court to pay support, but we also have an obligation to ensure that those payments are dispersed to the families that are rightfully owed those payments. And under the federal law of the Social Security Act, the child support program certainly wants to be able to continue that we maintain the economic and income supports for the families that we're currently serving. So it would have been perhaps more detrimental had we not been able to provide these funds to the families that we're currently serving. To speak to the comment about the federal law not being as specific as the current rule is, there are also, the federal law clearly provides states child support programs, the distribution rules for child support cases. In addition to that, the federal regulations also clearly explain how the distribution of child support payments in state agencies should be dispersed. And also our currently federally approved automated system is programmed accordingly to be able to disperse those payments to families as they are received in a timely fashion. And so with that, we have continued to provide that service under these circumstances, and we certainly have initiated quick and fast resolutions to try to ensure that the rules are quickly in place and that we're not in this situation again. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that explanation. If the federal laws are that detailed, why do we need these rules anyway?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great question. There are some options that states have, and some states have specific fees or interests that they charge. Although we don't have specific fees, there are options to how we would distribute certain types of payments based towards arrearages. So the laws allow, the rules allow us to be able to clarify how we are currently providing for that here in New Hampshire.
Thank you. All right.
Yes.
Any other
Which
questions?
rules?
The expired rules, and which are the same as these interim rules.
Yes, thank you.
But the question was, what have you been doing during the period when the rules were expired?
Thank you for the question, Representative. We have continued to distribute money as we have received them, as they had been documented in the existing rules. So we have continued business as usual to support the income for the families and for the paying parents that we are serving.
I would like to mention that for the last 10 years at least, it has been explicitly illegal to enforce expired rules. So you're very lucky that no one has complained, because they would be able to say, you took this money without any authority. So, any other questions, comments?
Move to approve.
Second by Representative Leon. Discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. The lottery intercept.
So this interim rule, like the previous one, has been filed to minimize the time between the expiration of the effective rule and the subsequent readoption. This rule has been expired since July 22nd of this year. And this one also has a state statute that authorizes the department to intercept this money along with the federal authority. But once again, there may be a question about how the program has been collecting and intercepting that money without rules, because it's the rules that specify what the process is.
Thank you. Similarly to what I had just previously stated, the program has continued under the authority of our Social Security Act on behalf of the Child Support Program in accordance with the state law. In addition to the New Hampshire Lottery Commission's rule related to the suspension due to child support, as well as our existing memorandum of understanding with the Lottery Commission, to continue to operate under the general procedures and policies that we always have operated under with relation to this rule. Again, the duty of the child support program is to ensure that we are collecting and enforcing orders of support under the Title 4D of the Social Security Act in compliance with our federal and regulations to ensure that parents are receiving income and are in compliance with their orders for child support. Recognize that Madam Chair, your point was very well taken of earlier, and certainly the department and our bureau is taking expedient action to address these issues moving forward.
How many lottery intercepts do you handle? Is it a weekly occurrence, or is it rare?
It is sporadic. I don't have the total numbers like on a daily or a monthly basis prepared for me today.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Move to approve by Senator Gray. Seconded by Representative Bland, who got a little bit ahead, Senator Ward. Discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much, and I'm glad you're at least acting on your expired rules. And I think we will not discuss the other business. Sorry about that.
Cancellation of the continued meeting?
There is no continued meeting in December.
There is just one thing. This is Mike Morrell's last JLCAR. Just want to recognize that before he retires.
Okay.
It's been my pleasure and privilege to work for the committee for all these years. I think this is a wonderful iteration of the committee, and I hope that all of you that are coming back, come back here.
Yes. Thank you. The House members who have been reelected, which is all of us, are very likely to be appointed very quickly. Senator Lang is responsible for the Senate doing the same. We do have a December meeting after the new House and new Senate have been organized. We do not have a continued meeting because
We do need one senator at least, so that we have a quorum, so that the chair can,
be elected.
so that the chair can be elected and appoint.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and have a good day. We are adjourned.